Scarlett Hayes thought she knew how her life would end, quietly in the human world, far away from the power struggles of the werewolf territories. But fate has other plans the night she crosses into northern Pack lands and meets Alexander Vayne, ruthless Alpha King, feared warrior, and the man the moon goddess herself has chosen as her mate. There's just one problem. Scarlett is human, and in Alexander's world, humans aren't Luna material. What begins as an impossible bond becomes a dangerous obsession. Alexander refuses to reject her, even as rivals circle and the council questions his right to rule with a human at his side. His enemies see her as a weakness to exploit, especially Lucien, the Silver Fang Alpha, who will stop at nothing to sever their bond and take her for himself. Through attacks, betrayal, and the lure of rejection, Scarlett must navigate a world of ancient politics and primal instincts she barely understands. As the bond between her and Alexander deepens, she learns that strength isn't about power or bloodlines. It's about standing beside the one who would burn the world for you. But the clock is ticking toward moonrise, when Alexander must mark her before the pack and the goddess, or lose her forever. In a storm of claws, fangs, and blood magic, their bond will be tested one last time. The only way to survive is to fight together, and when the night ends, the world will know she is his, and he is hers. Chapter 1. The forest was never meant to be this quiet. Leaves rustled faintly under Evelyn Hart's boots as she trudged through the narrow path carved between the trees. Her breath was loud in the silence, visible in the sharp October air. The sun had set faster than she expected, swallowing the last bit of orange light and casting the woods into heavy shadow. She hugged her backpack tighter against her chest, eyes darting to every creak and rustle in the undergrowth. Her professor had warned her not to use the forest as a shortcut. Too remote, too wild. But Evelyn didn't have time to wait for another bus. Her mother was home alone and needed her meds. And between college, part-time shifts, and sleepless nights, Evelyn didn't have time to be afraid of fairy tales. Still, something felt wrong. Every animal sound had vanished. The wind didn't whistle. No birds called. Just her own footsteps and the pounding of her heart. She was about to pick up the pace when she heard it. A low, guttural growl. Evelyn froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, carefully, she turned her head. There, just behind a twisted tree trunk, two glowing amber eyes watched her. No animal she knew had eyes like that. They didn't blink. They didn't move. Then, with terrifying speed, they lunged. She screamed and ran. Branches clawed at her face and arms as she tore through the forest. She didn't know where she was going, just away. The creature behind her didn't give chase on two legs. No, it crashed through the underbrush on four, snarling and fast, its growls vibrating through the ground beneath her feet. She tripped, cried out, and hit the dirt hard. Leaves and rocks scraped her palms and cheek. The world spun. Her ears rang. And then, silence. Evelyn pushed herself up, slowly. Her knees throbbed. Blood smeared across her hand. She turned and stared in horror. Towering above her, a massive black wolf stood, muscles coiled, teeth bared. It wasn't like any wolf she'd ever seen. It was too big, too intelligent. Its golden eyes locked onto her with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. It stepped forward, slow, deliberate, like a predator savoring the fear. Suddenly, a second growl ripped through the trees, deeper, fiercer, and more commanding. The black wolf snarled but turned its head just in time to meet a blur of motion that slammed into it like a freight train. Fur, fangs, and snarls exploded around her. Evelyn curled into a ball, covering her head, her heart pounding in her throat. The fight didn't last long. Within moments, the forest fell silent once again, except for the sound of heavy breathing. Evelyn cracked her eyes open. Standing a few feet away was not a wolf, but a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, shirtless despite the cold. Blood streaked across his bare chest and down his left arm. His pants were torn at the knees, his knuckles scraped raw. But it wasn't the injuries that made her stare. It was his eyes, amber, glowing, just like the creature's. He wasn't human, or not just. He stalked toward her like a storm given flesh. danger wrapped in control. "You saved me," Evelyn whispered, barely able to hear herself over the rush of adrenaline in her ears. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, looming, expression unreadable. His chest rose and fell with measured intensity, his gaze locked on her like she was a puzzle that refused to make sense. Then his nostrils flared. He inhaled sharply, once, then again. His brows drew together. "No," he muttered under his breath. "It can't be." "What?" His gaze sharpened, amber eyes darkening. His voice came next, a gravel-thick growl that made her heart skip a beat. "Mate." Evelyn's mouth parted in confusion. I don't understand." "I said," he snapped, voice clipped and furious, "you're my mate." His words meant nothing to her, but the disgust in his voice? That she understood perfectly. "You saved me," she whispered. Why are you looking at me like that? You're human." He said it like it was a slur. She stared, stunned. "I'm what?" His jaw flexed, muscles ticking in fury. "You shouldn't be real. This isn't how it's supposed to happen." Evelyn scrambled to her feet, still trembling. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who you are, what you are, but I didn't ask for any of this." The man growled, an actual low rumbling growl that vibrated the air between them. "I didn't ask for it either," he bit out, "and I reject it." He took another step closer, towering over her now. Fate made a mistake. Something inside her cracked. The words cut deeper than they should have, because some part of her felt them like a wound. Her stomach twisted with nausea. Her chest hurt. "I didn't come looking for you," she snapped, raising her chin. "So save your damn rejection for someone who cares." For a heartbeat, he looked almost surprised. Then, something flickered in his eyes. A flash of regret. Regret quickly buried under iron control. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "You don't belong in this world. Then let me go." "I already have." And with that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees like a ghost. Evelyn stood frozen, the pain in her chest growing heavier with every step he took away from her. She didn't understand it. Why did it feel like something important had just shattered? Why did her hands tremble more from his words than the near-death encounter she had just survived? She should have run the other way, called the police, filed a report, gotten as far from these cursed woods as she could. But all she could do was stand there, feeling something she couldn't name break. She didn't remember getting home. The rest of the night was a blur of fumbling keys, silent tears, and curling into bed, still wearing her muddy clothes. She didn't tell her mother anything. How could she? How could she explain that she'd seen a man with glowing eyes, that a monstrous wolf had nearly killed her, and that the man who saved her had looked at her like she was both poison and salvation? She stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. But sleep didn't come, because every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. Amber eyes, blood-stained skin, mate, and the rejection that followed. Chapter 2. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She tried to tell herself it was just the stress, just her overactive imagination after nearly being killed by a monstrous wolf and meeting a man who was clearly not human. But the nagging sensation wouldn't go away. For 3 days, she tried to return to normal. Her mother's health had taken a slight turn for the worse, and that was enough to distract her. She buried herself in her studies, clocked in at the cafe, and tried not to think about the impossibility of what had happened. But every night it crept back, the feeling of him. She'd gone to bed the first night after the attack, with her body stiff, mind buzzing with fear. But it wasn't fear that haunted her dreams. It was him, his face, those amber eyes, his growl. Mate, the word echoed in her skull, hollow and impossible. Why did it hurt so much? The pain had started that night, a deep, gnawing ache in her chest that no amount of sleep or distraction could ease. It grew worse with each passing day, tugging at her every time she closed her eyes, every time her thoughts wandered. And then the dreams came. It wasn't just his face anymore. No, in the dark, when her body finally allowed sleep, she found herself running through the woods, barefoot, heart pounding, branches whipping at her arms. There was something chasing her, a shadow, a presence too fast to track. Then she would stop, because there, standing in front of her, was him, Ronan, his amber eyes glowing brighter than the moon itself, His jaw clenched, his chest heaving with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. Mate. His voice echoed inside her head. Every time he spoke it, the ache in her chest worsened. It wasn't a dream anymore. She felt him, his presence, his scent, the raw, pulsing hunger that radiated from him as if he could claim her with a mere touch. But she was human. She shouldn't feel this way. Should she? The thought was unbearable. The third night after the incident, the ache turned into something else. A fever. A pulsing heat that suffocated her from the inside out. It started with a restless turn in her sleep, her body writhing against the sheets. Her skin burned, her breath shallow. The heat spread, settling low in her belly, making her limbs heavy, sluggish. No, she wasn't sick. She couldn't be. This wasn't a cold. This wasn't normal. Her body wasn't hers anymore. It was being pulled in a direction she didn't understand. The ache that had first appeared in her chest now throbbed in her core, building with every passing second. She could feel her heart race, her skin flush. The heat consumed her, wrapping her in something she couldn't control. And then she remembered. Ronan. That word. Mate. She shot up in bed, gasping for air, her skin damp with sweat. The moonlight from the window seemed almost too bright, as if it were mocking her confusion. Her fingers trembled as she touched her skin, trying to make sense of the overwhelming sensations flooding through her. She couldn't breathe. Her thoughts spun out of control. This can't be happening. He rejected me. He rejected me. But the ache didn't care. Evelyn couldn't ignore it any longer. She couldn't stay here, locked inside her room, suffocating in her own confusion. She needed answers. The following morning, she made her decision. Her legs carried her to the edge of town, to the thick forests she had walked through before. Despite her better judgment, she didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to find him. Him, the man whose very presence made her heart race, whose rejection had left her feeling like she was losing something vital, something she didn't even know she needed. The forest was eerily quiet, the air thick and heavy, with something that couldn't be explained. And then she saw him. He was there, standing just beyond the tree line, half shrouded in shadow. His chest was bare again, his gaze fixed on her like he'd been waiting. His hair was wind-tousled, his skin marked with faint scars from the fight with the wolf. But none of that mattered to Evelyn. It was his eyes. She couldn't look away. Why? Her voice was barely a whisper, but it echoed in the silence between them. Why am I feeling this way? Ronan didn't move, didn't speak for a long time. His amber gaze locked onto hers, filled with something dark, something primal. Because you're mine, he growled, his voice rough like gravel, but edged with something almost possessive. Her breath caught in her throat, and the heat inside her flared to life once again, burning hotter this time. It radiated from the inside out, pooling in places she couldn't ignore, places she hadn't known could feel this. Alive. He took a step toward her, and she couldn't move. It was as if her body was already responding to him, pulling her toward him. No, she said, the word coming out more like a plea than a protest. You rejected me. You said, that doesn't matter. He cut her off with a voice that was suddenly feral, raw. You're still mine, and I'll claim what's mine. He was closer now, his scent invading her senses, earthy, rich, dangerous. She could feel the force of his presence wrapping around her like a cage. His muscles tensed, his chest rising and falling sharply. But it wasn't just his presence that affected her. It was the bond. It pulled her, even now, after everything. It was as if her body knew him, knew she belonged to him, even if he didn't want to admit it. Evelyn swallowed hard. Why didn't you just take me when you had the chance? She managed to ask, her voice trembling. Ronan's eyes darkened. He closed the distance between them, now standing directly in front of her, towering over her fragile human form. I wanted to, he said quietly, voice thick with something she couldn't decipher. But you're human, and I was too weak to see what I already knew. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back up to her eyes, a low growl rumbling in his chest. I should have taken you then, before it got this bad, before it started tearing me apart. The words hung in the air like a promise and a threat. Evelyn's body was on fire. Her legs threatened to give way beneath her, and her hands trembled at her sides. Every cell in her body screamed for him, screamed for his touch. She wasn't sure if it was because of him, because of the bond, or if it was simply because she wanted him to, needed him. He reached for her, his hand brushing the side of her face, his touch searing against her skin. A wave of heat crashed over her, and that was when she realized he hadn't rejected her, he'd rejected himself. But the pull was there, stronger than anything they both felt, and neither of them could fight it anymore. Chapter 3. Forest smelled like moss and pine, the air heavy with the earthy scent of rain-soaked leaves. Ayla adjusted the straps of her backpack and stepped over a crooked root, laughing at something her best friend Juno said behind her. "This is a bad idea," Malik muttered for the 10th time. "We're too deep." "Oh please," Juno scoffed. "The trail's still marked. We're fine." But Ayla wasn't so sure. The deeper they ventured, the quieter the forest became, like the trees were holding their breath. She felt it in her bones, like being watched. Still, she pushed the unease aside. It was just a hike, a reunion trip with the people who had been like family to her for years. Foster kids bonded by circumstance and survival. Juno, Malik, and Talon had been raised alongside her in the same group home. Though she was the only one who hadn't been adopted out, they had stayed close. This trip had been her idea, one last weekend of reckless fun before life pulled them apart again. Only, none of them knew what lay ahead. Juno caught up to Ayla, nudging her with her elbow. "Still thinking about that guy from the gas station?" Ayla blinked, her thoughts scattering. Her mind had indeed drifted back to the stranger she'd locked eyes with earlier that day. Dark hair, a sharp jawline, eyes like a storm. The way he'd looked at her, like he knew her, had unsettled her deeply. He hadn't said a word, but something in her had cracked open under his stare. "No," she lied quickly. "Just thinking about how weird this forest is." "Weird?" Talon said, pulling his hood over his curly hair. "This place is beautiful." "It's quiet," Malik muttered, glancing around. "Too quiet." Ayla didn't disagree. Even the birds had gone silent. Suddenly, Juno stopped mid-step. "Wait, do you guys hear that?" They all froze. It started soft, barely audible, a rustle, a crunch of leaves. Then another, then several. "Is someone there?" Ayla called out, heart racing. Nothing. Then, movement. Fast, too fast for the human eye. Shadows zipped between the trees, tall and fast and wrong. Ayla's blood turned to ice. "Run," Malik shouted, already grabbing Juno's hand. They didn't need to be told twice. Ayla sprinted after them, her breath coming in ragged gasps as branches whipped across her skin. Someone was chasing them. No, hunting them. She heard Talon trip and fall, heard him shout out. But when she looked back, he was gone. "Talon!" she screamed. Juno yanked her arm. "Keep running." But Ayla's legs locked mid-step as a blur of movement slammed down in front of her. A man. No, not a man. He was massive, shirtless, his body rippling with muscle, his eyes glowing amber. Not from light, but from something inhuman. His presence was suffocating. Power poured off of him in waves. His dark hair was tousled from the wind, and his scent hit her like a wall. Wood smoke, pine, something wild. She stumbled back, her instincts screaming at her to run, but her limbs wouldn't move. Behind her, the others were yanked away, one by one, silent shadows dragging them into the trees. Only she remained. Frozen in place, Ayla stared up at him. He took a slow step toward her, each movement calculated. She was trembling now, her breath coming fast, her hands fisting at her sides. "What? Who?" she managed. His voice was deep and cold. "You're trespassing." Her jaw trembled. "We didn't know this was private," he growled, low and guttural. "This isn't private land. It's pack land." "Pack? Like wolves?" Her confusion must have shown, because his nostrils flared. He stepped closer, and she could feel the heat of his body despite the cold wind. His gaze flicked down her body, then locked on her face. His expression darkened. "You're not one of them," he said, almost to himself. "You smell different." Ayla opened her mouth, but before she could answer, another figure stepped from the trees. This one was also tall, but not as broad. His features were sharper, colder. His expression was unreadable. "Alpha Kale," he said. "The others have been secured." Kale. That must be his name. Kale didn't take his eyes off her. "Take them to the holding pit. This one," he reached out and gripped Ayla's arm, "comes with me." Her heart nearly exploded in her chest. No, wait, what? I didn't do anything. But he was already pulling her through the trees. Wee Kale could barely control the fury seething beneath his skin. The moment he scented her, everything in him had snapped. Mine. His wolf had risen so fast and violently, he nearly shifted then and there. But it didn't make sense. She was human. She smelled like rain, peaches, and something soft and fragile. Not like any werewolf. Not like a rogue. Not like a threat. But the bond was there. He felt it. In his bones. In his blood. His mate. His mate was a human girl who didn't even know what she'd wandered into. And worse, she had come with others, trespassing into their land in a time of tension and threat. He dragged her into his cabin, letting the door slam shut behind them. Her breath hitched audibly. "Let go of me," she shouted, twisting in his grip. Kale dropped her arm. She stumbled back, rubbing at the spot head gripped. "What the hell is wrong with you? Where are my friends? Who are you?" Kale turned away, his jaw clenched. His wolf was clawing at his insides. "Touch her. Mark her. Take her." He gritted his teeth. "You're not hurt," he said gruffly. "Your friends aren't either. But you shouldn't have come here. We didn't know. You entered protected territory," he snapped. "At a time when rogues are circling, you could have been killed." Her lips parted, and for the first time, he saw fear. Not just fear of being caught, but something deeper. She wrapped her arms around herself, stepping back until her shoulders hit the wall. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Kale looked at her, really looked at her. Her dark hair was tousled from the wind. Her clothes were damp from the forest floor. Her eyes, gods, those eyes, held fire and fear all at once. "I can't let you leave," he said finally. "What?" she gasped. "Why?" He hesitated, then said the words he hadn't said in 100 years. "Because you're mine." She blinked. "What?" "You're my mate," Kale growled, his voice hoarse now. "And I don't reject fate." Ayla stared at him like he'd gone mad. And maybe he had, because no Elsa had ever been fated to a human before. And yet here she was, soft, beautiful, and entirely his. The silence of the night was unsettling. Arya walked with her arms tightly crossed over her chest, trying to shake off the memory of those golden eyes. The Alpha. His voice still echoed in her head. Low, dangerous, threaded with a power that both terrified and thrilled her. She hadn't told her friends what had happened after they scattered. She couldn't. Who would believe that a man had touched her and her entire soul had trembled? And worse, he had called her his mate. "That's not possible," she whispered to herself as she climbed into her bed that night, her hands trembling. Werewolves weren't real. They were legends, whispers in old stories told to keep children in line. They didn't exist. They couldn't. And yet, the woods told a different story. That night, the blood moon hung low in the sky, casting a crimson glow over the town. Arya stared at it through her bedroom window, unable to sleep. The moon pulsed as if it were alive, watching, waiting. Her skin burned where the Alpha had touched her. The side of her neck still felt like it bore the imprint of his thumb, though it had only been for a second. She gritted her teeth, tossing in her sheets. Down the street, the forest stirred, and in its darkest heart, Alpha Kale of the Nightshade Pack stood beneath the howling moon, his chest bare, his breathing ragged, and his mind in chaos. "She's human." He growled to his beta, Elias, who stood a few feet behind him, silent. "She has no scent of wolf in her, no pack. She smelled like sunshine and springtime," Elias muttered. "Different, but mate bonds don't lie." Kale clenched his fists. "I should have marked her, but she looked at me like I was a monster." "You did throw her against a tree," Kale snarled. Elias wisely shut up. Kale's wolf was restless, furious. Mate, Nate. The word pulsed in his head, louder than his own heartbeat. But she had fled, rejected him, not with words, but with her eyes. "She doesn't know," he whispered. "She doesn't know what she is. She's not just human, is she?" Kale didn't answer, because deep down, he wasn't sure. Arya woke with sweat coating her body and the taste of iron in her mouth. A nightmare, the same one again. The forest, the eyes, the scream. Only this time, she heard a voice at the end of it. "Run, little mate." She shook violently, curling up in bed. The word mate kept haunting her. Since that night, nothing felt the same. Food tasted off. Her body was sensitive to touch. Her dreams were vivid, feverish. and she swore she could feel someone watching her. She avoided her friends after school, claiming she needed time. Truth was, she didn't want to explain why she was staring off into the trees like they were calling her home. Because the pull was real. The forest wanted her back. He wanted her back. Kale stood at the edge of the boundary between the human world and his pack's territory, eyes fixed on the distant town lights. He hadn't gone this long without sleep in years, but every time he closed his eyes, all he saw was her face, her fear, her scent. He didn't do fear. He was the most feared alpha in 3 regions. Other packs submitted the moment he approached. Rogue wolves fled at the mention of his name. He was the most feared alpha in 3 regions. Other packs submitted the moment he approached. Rogue wolves fled at the mention of his name. But a human girl had looked at him like he was the prey, and it twisted something dark inside him. "You can't force it, Kale," Elias said gently. "If she rejects you—" "She didn't reject me." Kale's voice was low, lethal. "She doesn't understand what she is to me." "And what if she never does?" Kale's wolf growled inside his chest. "Then I'll make her understand." That evening, Aria's town buzzed with tension. People were uneasy, locking their doors earlier than usual. Something was wrong. She sat on the porch steps of her guardian's house, sipping hot tea, trying to calm the strange fire under her skin. A storm was brewing, but there wasn't a single cloud in the sky. Then came the howl, low, ancient, bone-deep. She dropped her cup. The sound tore through her like claws, dragging something primal to the surface. Her breath quickened, her vision blurred, her skin prickled with static. And then she saw them, in the distance, glowing eyes in the woods, watching her, calling her. She backed into the house, slammed the door, and slid to the floor. "What's happening to me?" But there was no answer, only silence, and the sound of her racing heart. That same night, deep in the woods, a meeting took place. Alpha Lucien of the Silver Fang pack, Kale's rival, had caught wind of something unusual. "A human mate?" he scoffed. "Kale's bloodline must be cursed." "He's weakening," his second-in-command said. "We can use it." Lucien grinned, showing his fangs. "Find her. Bring her to me. If Kale wants her, she's the perfect bait." Back in her room, Aria stared at the moonlight streaking across her sheets. Her head pounded, her skin burned, her soul whispered one name: Kale. She didn't know how she knew it, but she did. And in the darkness of her room, something inside her cracked open and howled. ... Chapter 5. The night was still, too still. Lucien leaned against the jagged rock face, eyes gleaming as he looked out into the forest where the moon had begun its slow descent. The Silver Fang pack was watching, waiting, for him, for her. He knew Kale would never bend, not willingly. Kale was the alpha, strong, ruthless. But even the most powerful wolves could be undone by their mates, and Lucien's plan was simple. Destroy the bond between Kale and his human mate, and the alpha's strength would falter. Lucien's smile curled as he let out a low chuckle. His beta, Tarek, stepped forward, his long dark hair tied back and eyes filled with ferocity. "We've scouted the area. She's close," Tarek reported. "Her scent lingers by the edge of the human town, not far now." Lucien stood tall, cracking his neck in a deliberate, cold motion. "Good. We'll take her tonight, before Kale realizes what's happening." Aria had no idea that the danger was already circling her. She was still shaken from the howl the night before. The sound, so raw and primal, had rattled her. It wasn't just a wolf's howl. It was the howl of a pack, a collective cry that sliced through the fabric of the night, and it had called to her, pulled at something inside her that she couldn't name. But when she went to school the next morning, she tried to convince herself that she had imagined it, that the world wasn't falling apart around her. Still, the unease gnawed at her as she walked the halls of her school. She couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on her, that something, or someone, was always just behind her, hidden in the shadows. A group of her friends gathered around her at lunch. They were laughing, but she couldn't fully focus. Her attention kept drifting back to the windows, to the trees that stood outside. The wind had picked up again, and the branches swayed ominously. "What's up with you today?" Juno asked, tilting her head. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Ayla didn't have an answer. She couldn't tell them about the howls, the pull, the growing fire inside her. Instead, she forced a smile and shook her head. "Just tired," she muttered. But her friends weren't fooled. They'd been through enough together to know when something was wrong. Juno narrowed her eyes. "You're not getting into any trouble, are you? You know the woods aren't safe at night." Ayla's heart skipped at the mention of the woods, but she quickly dismissed it. "No trouble. Just weird dreams." Malik, the most skeptical of them all, raised an eyebrow. "Weird dreams? I think you're just running yourself ragged, Ayla. Too much on your mind." "Yeah," Juno added. "But if it's that bad, maybe we should stay close tonight, okay? Don't go wandering off by yourself." Ayla nodded absently, barely hearing the words. Her thoughts were somewhere else, far beyond the confines of the school, beyond the walls and windows, deep into the darkened woods where he was waiting for her. The night dragged on as Arya tried to pretend that everything was fine, but the closer it got to sunset, the harder it became to ignore the pull. The ache in her chest had grown worse. Her skin felt like it was on fire, and all she wanted was to flee the suffocating heat. But she couldn't escape it. And then he appeared, Kale. He stood outside the school gate, his eyes locked on her, his presence as powerful as the moon itself. She didn't know how he got there, how he always seemed to find her. His gaze was unwavering, pulling her in with the strength of a magnet. Arya froze, her heart thudding in her chest. She should have been angry with him for what happened, what he had done to her. But instead, there was only that pull, that ache deep within her that told her to go to him. She turned away, her hands shaking as she grabbed her bag and walked briskly in the other direction. But she could still feel his eyes on her, like they were branded onto her skin. He was everywhere now. Kale's wolf roared in frustration, the bond between them tugging harder than it had ever done before. He had tried to stay away from her. He had. But every time he closed his eyes, she was there, calling to him. He had tried to hold himself back, but she was his mate. And she didn't know what that meant, not yet. But she would. The thought of her running from him stoked the fire inside him, the primal rage that had always lived beneath his skin. He couldn't let her go. Not now, not ever. He was about to step forward, to cross the line into human territory, when a voice behind him stopped him cold. Kale, Lucien, his rival, his former packmate, the one wolf who had always sought to take everything Kale had, everything Kale was. "What do you want, Lucien?" Kale asked, his tone cold and detached, though his wolf was anything but calm. Lucien's smile was sharp and calculating. "I'm here to offer a solution to your little problem, Kale, your human mate." Kale's eyes flashed. "Stay away from her." Lucien ignored the warning. "Oh, I will, for now. But you know, I think it's time we tested the bond, don't you?" Kale's body tensed. "What are you implying?" "I'm implying that you're not the only one who wants her," Lucien said smoothly. "And I think you'll find that your human mate will be more easily persuaded than you think." Kale snarled, his eyes turning amber. "If you touch her, I'll rip you apart." Lucien raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm not touching her. But the bond, Kale, it's fragile, isn't it? Especially with a human. One misstep and, well, the bond could break." Kale's breath quickened, his wolf roaring in the back of his mind. "Stay out of this, Lucien," Kale growled. "If you lay one finger on her, I'll tear your pack apart." Lucien chuckled, his eyes glinting with malice. "We'll see how strong your bond really is. Soon enough, Kale." And with that, Lucien disappeared into the shadows, leaving Kale standing at the edge of the human world, his mind racing, his instincts screaming. That night, as Arya made her way home, the sound of footsteps followed her in the dark. Too light, too fast. She turned sharply but saw nothing. The woods loomed ahead, black and thick. She wanted to scream, she wanted to run, but her feet wouldn't move. A low growl broke the silence. Her breath caught in her throat, and then two amber eyes flickered through the trees, glowing faintly in the darkness. Kale. Alpha Kale stood by the window, arms crossed, her fingers twisting in her lap. Her mind swam with confusion, her heart racing in her chest. The entire day had been a whirlwind. One moment she was wandering through the forest with her friends, and the next she was held captive by the most dangerously magnetic man she had ever laid eyes on. Alpha Kale stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. His gaze hadn't left her since she arrived. He was trying to understand her, trying to make sense of the bond he felt so fiercely. She wasn't a wolf. She wasn't from his world. And yet, she was his mate. "I still don't understand," Ariella finally whispered. "Why me? I'm just a human." Kale turned, his eyes glowing with that same silver intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "You're not just anything," he said. "You're mine." The way he said it, so raw, so certain, stole the breath from her lungs. She looked up at him, confusion warring with something far more dangerous, attraction. "But you're a werewolf," she said, the word still foreign on her tongue. "And I'm not." He stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. "It doesn't matter. The bond doesn't care about species. It only cares about truth, soul to soul." Her throat tightened. "Is that why I feel like I'm going crazy every time you're near?" Kale's lips twitched slightly. "Yes, and it'll only get worse the more we resist it." Ariella stood, needing to put space between them, but he closed the distance faster than she could move. His hands reached for her, not roughly, but with a gentleness that surprised her. His fingertips brushed her jawline, tipping her head up to meet his gaze. "I should let you go," he murmured, "but I won't." "Why?" Her voice trembled. "Because the moment I touched you, I knew I would burn the world to the ground before I let anyone take you from me." She should have been terrified. Maybe she was. But under the fear was a flame she didn't understand, one that whispered to her that he wasn't lying, that he meant every word. "You don't even know me," she whispered. His thumb traced her bottom lip. "I know your scent, your heartbeat, the way your soul calls to mine. That's all I need." The air between them spunked, charged with something ancient and wild. Ariella's hands moved of their own accord, flattening against his chest. His heart thundered beneath her palm, fierce and fast. "Are you going to hurt me?" she asked. His eyes darkened. "Never." "Then why do I feel like I'm standing on the edge of something that will destroy me?" Kale leaned in, his forehead pressing against hers. "Because you are, and I'm falling with you." Hours passed. She stayed in the room head prepared for her, luxurious, warm, and far too close to his. She couldn't sleep. Her body ached with questions. Her mind raced with feelings she didn't understand. And worst of all, her soul throbbed like something essential had been ripped from it, and only Kale could soothe the pain. A knock on the door startled her. "Ariella?" His voice was rough. "Yeah. Can I come in?" She hesitated. "Okay." He entered quietly, barefoot, dressed in black sweatpants and a fitted shirt. Even casual, he looked like a predator, holding himself back. "I won't stay long," he said. I needed to see you." She nodded, and without thinking, scooted over on the bed. Kale didn't hesitate. He sat beside her, their thighs brushing, his heat wrapped around her, calming her nerves. "I don't know what to do with this," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "Everything I thought I knew about the world changed in one day." He reached out and took her hand, his touch warm, grounding. "I won't ask you to understand everything now. I just want you to trust me. I don't know if I can. I'll earn it, every damn day." Silence settled between them again, but this time, it was not empty. It was full of something sacred, something unspoken. Ariella's head dropped onto his shoulder before she could stop herself. Kale froze, then exhaled a long, shaky breath and wrapped an arm around her. His wolf stirred beneath his skin, calm for the first time since they met her. "I feel safe," she whispered. "I don't know why." His lips brushed her hair. "Because you are." Somewhere deep in the forest, far from the warmth of Kale's pack house, a hooded figure crouched by a stream. "A girl's been found," the stranger growled to a shadow behind him. "The Alpha has her." A flash of red eyes gleamed in the dark. "We need her blood," the second voice rasped, "before the bond is complete. Then we strike soon." They vanished into the woods like smoke. Back, in Kale's arms, Ariella slept. For the first time since arriving in the wolf's territory, she felt peace. She didn't know what the future held, or what she was becoming a part of, but something told her this was only the beginning, and fate never made mistakes. For the first time, a flicker of something like pride shone in his eyes. "Then let's give them a reason to fear us both." They ran, through the trees, over roots, across soft earth and stone. Aria's lungs burned, but Luca was a shadow at her side, guiding her, shielding her from branches and ambushes. His body moved with an animalistic grace, lethal and silent. Every few seconds, he'd glance back at her to make sure she was still with him. They burst into a clearing just as 3 wolves stepped into their path, snarling, wild, rabid with hunger. "Get behind me," he said sharply. But she didn't, not completely. She pressed close but didn't hide. Her presence at his back gave him something he hadn't known he needed: grounding. Luca didn't shift into full wolf form. He didn't need to. Claws burst from his hands, fangs glinting as he roared and leapt at the largest wolf first. A flurry of fur and blood followed. Arya watched, horror-struck, as Luca tore through them with frightening efficiency. But he wasn't invincible. He bled. He grunted in pain when one of the wolves bit deep into his side. "Luca!" she screamed. That scream lit something in him, the bond, the power of it. With a final savage growl, he snapped the last rogue's neck. Then, silence, except for the ragged sound of his breathing. He stumbled, knees threatening to buckle. Arya ran to him, catching him just in time. His blood soaked her shirt. Hot and terrifying. "No, no, no, stay with me. I'm okay," he grunted. "You're not." But he looked down at her, blood on his lips, and whispered, "You stayed." She nodded, tears brimming. He cupped her cheek with a trembling hand, his thumb smearing a streak of blood over her skin. "I should never have rejected you. I see it now. You said you didn't believe in mates. I was wrong. You're not just a mate. You're mine." And then, just as the dawn broke over the horizon, painting the trees with golden light, he leaned in and kissed her. It was not gentle. It was raw, desperate, like a man who had nearly lost everything and finally found something worth living for. Arya clung to him, to the heat of his skin and the thunder of his heart. And though everything around them was blood and danger and broken rules, for the first time she felt safe and claimed. ... Chapter 8. The night air was heavy, the forest breathing with the strange silence that came before a storm. The trees seemed to lean closer, their shadows curling around the lone figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Scarlett's heart thudded, not from fear this time, at least not the kind she'd once felt. It was the kind of dread that came when you knew you were about to make a choice you couldn't take back. Her human instincts screamed to run, but something deeper, something far older and primal, rooted her feet to the earth. She could feel him, Alexander. His presence wasn't like anyone else's. It was a command in the air, a ripple of power that pressed against her skin. And when he stepped out from between the trees, his tall frame cloaked in black, his eyes catching the moonlight, she swore the world bent toward him. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, though the words were for herself more than for him. His gaze dragged over her, slow and deliberate, making her shiver. "And yet," he murmured, closing the distance between them, "you called for me." She had, not with words, not even with the link that mates shared, a link he had once rejected. But somehow, in the restless ache that had haunted her since the last time they spoke, she'd wanted him near, and he'd come. Scarlett clenched her fists. Why? Why now? Alexander's lips curved in something too dark to be a smile. Because the blood moon rises tomorrow night. And with it, every boundary between the human and wolf world will thin. You will be vulnerable, and so will I. She tried to laugh, bitter and sharp. You? Vulnerable? You made it clear I wasn't your mate, but you didn't need me. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something, regret, frustration, in his eyes. Need is dangerous, Scarlett, but I have come to understand. His voice dropped, deep and low. That wanting is far worse. The forest seemed to hold its breath. She took a step back, but he followed, closing the space until she could feel the heat radiating from him. What do you want from me? She asked, though she already knew. Alexander's hand came up, slow enough to let her pull away, but she didn't. His fingers brushed her jaw, his touch firm but almost reverent. I want you under my protection during the blood moon. If you're not, they will come for you. They? His gaze was all predator now. Rogues, those who can smell the bond even when you can't. And they'll want to claim you before I do. Her breath hitched. Before you? Yes. His voice was a growl now, threading through her bones. Before I claim what I should have the moment I saw you. Before I was a fool who thought rejecting you would keep you safe. Scarlett's pulse raced. So this is about power? About ownership? This is about survival, he said, his thumb brushing over her lip in a touch that was both possessive and tender. And yes, about ownership. You were always mine, even when I tried to deny it. The silence stretched, and in it, Scarlett felt the weight of the choice before her. Go with him, step into his shadow, and be marked, bound, to a world she wasn't sure she belonged in. Or walk away and face the robes alone. The wind picked up, carrying the distant howl of a wolf. Alexander's eyes glinted, and he leaned close enough for his breath to warm her ear. Come to me tomorrow night, he said, his voice a dark promise. And I will make sure no one ever touches you again. Refuse, and you will face the blood moon alone. He stepped back, fading into the darkness, leaving her standing in the clearing with the echo of his words burning through her. For the first time, Scarlett wasn't sure if her fear came from the danger outside or from the danger Alexander had become inside her heart. Chapter 9. The moon hung high over the forest, casting long silver shadows across the damp ground. The cold bit into her skin as she stumbled forward, lungs burning, her heartbeat thundering louder than the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. Leela didn't look back. She didn't dare. Behind her, she could feel them, the pull of the bond she never asked for, the silent tether that refused to let her go. Her body still remembered the heat of his touch. The way his voice had wrapped around her name like a promise and a threat all at once. Alpha Kale, her mate. The man who had looked into her eyes weeks ago and said, with cruel precision, I reject you. But rejecting her hadn't freed her. If anything, it had bound her tighter. When she finally reached the cabin, her temporary safe house, her legs nearly gave out. Her hands trembled as she slammed the door shut, locking it, bolting it, even pushing a chair beneath the handle. She pressed her back to the door, chest heaving. Her body was slick with cold sweat, and her pulse still skittered wildly in her throat. You shouldn't run like that. The voice came from the shadows, deep, calm, male. Her blood turned to ice. Kale stepped forward from the dark corner of the room as if he had been waiting for her all along. Moonlight caught on the hard lines of his face, the sharp edge of his jaw, the burning amber in his eyes. Her breath caught. No, not here. Not now. What do you want? She whispered, her voice hoarse. His gaze dropped to her neck, where her pulse beat frantically. You know what I want. You rejected me. Her voice cracked, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I did. His tone was flat, but something flickered in his eyes. And yet, here you are, still mine. Leela's legs threatened to buckle under the weight of his presence. It was wrong, how her body still reacted to him. The heat that spread under her skin was a betrayal. She hated it. She hated him. You can't have it both ways, she said, forcing steel into her voice. Kale's lips curved into something dangerous. I can have whatever I decide to take, little Omega. Her stomach twisted at the title. I'm not an Omega. His expression darkened. You don't even know what you are yet. The air between them tightened until it felt hard to breathe. Leela's mind screamed for her to run, to fight, to do anything but let him close the distance. But when he moved, slow and deliberate, her feet refused to obey. He stopped inches from her, his scent wrapping around her like smoke. Worn cedar, wild musk, something dark and feral beneath. You think you can escape me, he murmured, his breath brushing her cheek. But every time you run, I'll find you. Not because I want to, his voice dropped lower, but because I have to. Her heart hammered painfully. Then unbind it, break it. His eyes locked onto hers, unblinking. I could, but I won't. Her breath hitched. Why? Kale leaned in, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. Because I'd rather watch you fight it. I'd rather watch you burn. The confession left her cold and trembling. He stepped back finally, leaving her gasping for air, as if he had stolen it from her without laying a finger on her. This is far from over, he said, his voice a quiet promise. The chains between us aren't meant to be broken. And then, before she could speak, he was gone, disappearing into the night as silently as he had appeared, leaving Leela alone in the cabin, and more trapped than she had ever been. Chapter 10. The forest was unnervingly quiet. No rustling leaves, no crickets, no distant howl. Only her heartbeat, frantic, pounding in her ears as Alara ran. Branches whipped at her face, tearing at her sweater, but she didn't stop. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed in protest, but she knew she couldn't slow down. Not when she could feel it, the heavy, suffocating pull in her chest that told her he was close. Damien. The bond between them had shifted tonight. No longer just a thread pulling faintly at the edge of her consciousness. It was now a chain, hot and heavy, dragging her toward him no matter how far she ran. And the terrifying truth, it wasn't just his anger she could feel now. It was his hunger. "You can't run from this, little human," his voice called from somewhere in the darkness. Not loud, not a shout, but deep, smooth, and cold enough to chill her bones. "You can't run from me." She stumbled over a root, falling to her knees. Her palms scraped against the damp earth, but she pushed herself up, trying to ignore the sharp sting of pain. She could smell him now, cedarwood, smoke, and something darker, something feral. Her heart skipped a beat when she heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Damien didn't rush, he didn't need to. By the time she burst into a small clearing, her breaths were sharp gasps. The moon bathed everything in silver, making the shadows dance. And for one brief moment, she thought she might have gotten away, until a large, dark figure stepped out from the trees in front of her. His eyes glowed like molten gold. "Found you," he murmured. Alara backed away instinctively, but every step she took made him take one forward. His gaze never left hers, the kind of stare that stripped you bare, left you vulnerable, trembling. "You're hurting yourself," he said, his voice lower now, almost a growl. "Your hands, your knees, you're bleeding. I don't like it." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. "Then let me go." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that unreadable alpha mask. "You're mine." He said it like a law, like an absolute truth the universe itself couldn't defy. "Do you know what it does to me to feel you run from me? To smell your fear? I told you, Alara. I don't share. Not your scent. Not your time. Not your heart." Her chest ached at the word heart. She didn't want to admit how it hurt to hear it in his voice, as if he already owned it. "You don't even want me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You made that clear when I rejected you," he interrupted, stepping closer until there was barely a breath between them. "That was before I knew what you were to me. Before I realized that even without the bond, I'd still want you, need you." His hand lifted, fingers brushing along her jaw. It was gentle, too gentle for the man she'd seen tear through rogues without hesitation. "I'm not your kind," she said, shaking her head. "Wrong," he murmured, his thumb sliding across her lower lip. "You're mine. That's all that matters." Her pulse raced, heat curling low in her stomach against her will. She hated that his nearness did this to her, hated the way his scent made her head spin. Damien leaned in, his lips near her ear. "Run again, and I'll hunt you. Not to scare you, not to punish you, but because I like the way you look when you're desperate for breath and still fighting me." She shivered. Then he stepped back, letting the night air fill the space between them, but his gaze stayed locked on hers. "You belong to me, Alara, even if I have to break every rule in my world to keep you." And with that, he turned away, melting into the shadows, but the bond between them still burned in her chest, a fire she couldn't put out. Chapter 11. The forest was silent, too silent. Arius' pulse pounded in her ears as she followed behind Kale, his tall, broad frame a dark silhouette against the moonlight filtering through the dense canopy. His hand was wrapped around hers, not gently, but firmly, as if he was dragging her somewhere she didn't yet understand. They had left the pack grounds hours ago. She had asked him where they were going. He had given no answer. Now, the silence between them was heavy enough to crush her. "You're hurting me," she whispered, trying to pull her hand free. Kale's head turned slightly, his eyes flashing gold in the dark. "You'll live." She bit her lip, trying not to snap at him. She didn't understand what was going on. He had been distant since the council meeting 2 nights ago, barely speaking to her, and now he was acting as though some unseen danger was breathing down their necks. "Kale," she tried again, her voice softer this time. "What's happening?" They stepped into a small clearing, and Kale finally released her hand. He paced for a moment, his jaw tight, his shoulders wound up in tension. She'd seen him angry before, but this was different. This was the kind of controlled fury that made her chest tighten with unease. "They're coming for you," he finally said, voice low and rough. Her breath caught. Who? He turned to face her, and in that moment, his gold eyes burned so brightly she almost stepped back. The rogues, or maybe the council. Hell, maybe both. I don't know yet. Her heart was in her throat. Why me? Because you're mine. The words were guttural, torn from somewhere deep in his chest. And that makes you a target, especially now that they know what you are. Her pulse skipped. I'm human. His lips curled, not in amusement, but in something darker. Not entirely. The world tilted. What are you talking about? Hale stepped closer, his heat swallowing the space between them. His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek, not gently, not tenderly, but as if reminding her she was real, tangible, and his. You think I don't know why I couldn't reject you? He said quietly. You think it was just fate? No, Arya. You're something they want, something they will kill for. A chill slid down her spine. What am I? I don't have the answers yet, he admitted, his voice softer now. But I will find them. Until then, you don't leave my sight. Not for a second, not for anyone. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she wasn't some fragile thing to be locked away. But there was something in his voice, in the way his hand tightened against her jaw, that told her this wasn't the time to fight him. The air shifted. A branch snapped in the darkness. Kale's head snapped toward the sound, a deep growl rumbling from his chest. Stay behind me, he ordered, his voice suddenly all alpha command. Arya's breath came fast, her hands trembling as shadows began to move at the tree line. She saw glowing eyes, too many of them. Rogues. Kale stepped forward, his shoulders squared, his presence radiating dominance. You made a mistake coming here, he called out, voice carrying across the clearing like thunder. A low, mocking laugh echoed from the darkness. The mistake was yours, Alpha, thinking you could hide her. Before Arya could react, the first rogue lunged from the trees, fast, too fast, and Kale was already there, meeting him mid-air, claws flashing, teeth bared. The clearing erupted into chaos. Chapter 12. The night was unnervingly still. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant howls, only the heavy silence of a forest holding its breath. Scarlett stood in the center of the moonstone circle, the cold marble beneath her bare feet biting into her skin. Above her, the moon glowed full and silver, bathing the clearing in an ethereal light. The ancient runes carved into the surrounding stones pulsed faintly, reacting to the power in the air. This was it, the trial that would decide if she lived or died. The Alpha Council sat on their thrones of blackened oak, their sharp eyes following her every move. But her attention kept pulling toward him. Alexander, her once fated mate, the man who had looked at her with devotion in the past, now regarding her with nothing but a predator's detachment. His broad shoulders were stiff, his jaw clenched. The bond between them, a frayed, bleeding thread, still hummed faintly in her chest. Even though he had tried to sever it, the ache it caused was almost worse than the fear. Scarlett Winters, the High Alpha, began, his voice low but carrying like thunder. You have been accused of betrayal, harboring rogues, defying your Alpha, and violating pack law. Scarlett's fingers curled into fists. I harbored no one, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. And I defied nothing but the cruelty of being treated like something disposable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but Alexander didn't so much as blink. The High Alpha's gaze narrowed. Then you will prove your innocence to the moon. Two warriors stepped forward, dragging a trembling Omega between them. Scarlett recognized the boy, Liam, barely 18, barely more than a child. She had hidden him in the old mill for 2 nights to keep him from being beaten by higher-ranked wolves. And now, it seemed, that act of kindness might cost her everything. Shift, the High Alpha ordered her. Let the moon judge you. Scarlett swallowed hard. The truth was, she hadn't shifted in months. Not since Alexander had rejected her and the bond's magic had started to weaken her wolf. Pain flared inside her, but she forced herself to close her eyes, to reach for the animal within. She could feel it, the golden flicker of her wolf's essence, weak but still alive. Come on, she begged silently. Please, not now, not in front of him. Her bones began to ache, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Then she felt it, a tug, like someone pulling her back from the change. Her eyes flew open. Alexander was staring at her, and she knew, knew he was doing it, blocking her shift. He was an alpha, and the bond between them, no matter how damaged, still gave him influence over her wolf. Rage flooded her. "You're doing this," she accused, her voice trembling with fury. "You want me to fail?" His lips curved into the faintest smile. "If the moon deems you unworthy, then you are unworthy. I don't have to lift a finger." The crowd erupted in whispers again, but the High Alpha's hand silenced them. "Enough," the elder barked. "If she cannot shift, she will face the trial of the hunt at dawn." Scarlett's stomach dropped. The trial of the hunt was an execution disguised as sport, set loose into the forest to be hunted by the pack's best warriors. Few survived. Alexander rose from his seat, walking toward her with the slow, deliberate steps of a predator. The scent of pine and steel wrapped around her, as familiar as it was dangerous. He stopped just inches away, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "If you survive, Scarlett, you'll come back to me on your knees. If you die," his gaze darkened, "at least I won't have to see your eyes anymore." Something inside her, something she thought had been burned to ashes, flickered to life. Not the soft love she once had for him, but something sharper, colder. She lifted her chin. "Careful, Alexander. The moon has a habit of turning hunters into prey." For the first time, his expression shifted, just slightly, but enough for her to see it. The crack in his armor. Tomorrow, the hunt would begin. And if she had to bleed to survive it, so be it. Because she was done running. Chapter 13. The night smelled wrong. Scarlett stood at the edge of the balcony outside her room in the pack house, her fingers curling against the wooden railing. The wind carried the forest scent toward her. But beneath the usual pine and damp earth was something sharp, metallic, dangerous. Her wolf shifted restlessly beneath her skin, pacing, ears pricked. She didn't need anyone to tell her something was coming. Alexander appeared below in the courtyard. Shirtless, despite the cold, his hair damp from the evening rain. He was speaking in low tones to his beta, but even from here, she could see the tightness in his jaw. His gaze kept flicking toward the tree line, like he expected it to move. When he glanced up and caught her watching, his eyes softened for just a moment. Then the gold in his irises flared. Not the warm, molten gold she had seen when he let his guard down, but the sharp, dangerous gold of the alpha in him. "Inside," he called up, voice carrying even over the wind. "Now." Scarlett hesitated. "What's going on?" "Inside," he repeated, this time with a note of command that brushed against her like static. Her wolf bristled under it, but she turned to obey. Right up until a howl ripped through the forest. It wasn't a warning howl from one of their own. This one was jagged, full of rage and pain, and it came from beyond the border. The courtyard erupted into motion. Wolves and warriors poured from the pack house, shifting mid-stride, the air suddenly full of fur, snarls, and pounding paws. Alexander was already pulling his pants off to shift when another howl, this one closer, split the night. "They've crossed the border," his beta shouted. Alexander's head snapped toward Scarlett. "Stay inside the pack house. Do not follow me." Her heart clenched. "You can't face them alone." "I'm not asking," he snapped, his eyes flashing gold again. "I'm telling you." Then he shifted, the sound of bones and sinew realigning, breaking the night's rhythm. And in moments, the massive black wolf that was her mate bounded into the dark with the others. Scarlett's hands curled into fists. She knew she should do what he said. She knew the safest place was behind those walls. But every instinct in her screamed to follow him. That metallic tang in the air wasn't just danger. It was death. The forest was alive with the sounds of battle by the time she reached it. The crunch of leaves under claws, the deep-throated snarls of wolves locked in combat, the high-pitched yelps of pain. Her lungs burned as she ran, dodging branches, following the bond between them. It thrummed hot and tight in her chest, pulling her like an invisible leash. When she found him, it was in the center of a clearing, lit by the pale wash of moonlight through the clouds. Alexander's wolf was a blur of motion, taking down a rogue with a savage snap of his jaws. He spun, claws raking another's flank, his movements as lethal as they were beautiful. But then she saw it. Him. The enemy alpha. He was massive, fur black as midnight, eyes burning with a feral, unnatural red. He stalked from the tree line with deliberate steps, each one sinking deep into the earth, and Scarlett felt the bond between her and Alexander throb with warning. The rogue Alpha lunged. Alexander moved to intercept, but something primal took hold of Scarlett. Her wolf tore free mid-leap, the shift so fast and raw that pain flared hot through every muscle. In seconds, she wasn't Scarlett the human anymore. She was fur, teeth, and instinct. She hit the rogue Alpha hard, her jaws snapping near his throat. He twisted, slamming her into the ground, his claws raking her side. Pain ripped through her, but she didn't stop. She fought with everything she had, for Alexander, for herself, for the fragile future they had never even had a chance to build. A roar shattered the air. Alexander's wolf was there in a heartbeat, ripping the enemy Alpha off her with a force that shook the ground. He drove him back, teeth sinking deep into the other wolf's neck. Blood sprayed, hot and metallic, coating the grass. The rogue Alpha collapsed with a final snarl, his body going limp. The clearing went still. Alexander shifted back first, his chest heaving, skin slick with sweat and blood. His eyes found her immediately. Relief flickered there, brief, but enough to make her heart stutter. Then his expression hardened. He crossed the space between them in 3 long strides and caught her by the back of the neck. His grip, firm but not cruel. "Don't ever do that again," he rasped, voice raw. "I almost lost you." Scarlett shifted back, the cool night air hitting her bare skin. She was trembling from the adrenaline, from the pain in her side, but most of all from the intensity in his gaze. "And I'd do it again," she said, her voice unsteady, "if it meant saving you." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his hand slid from her neck to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her skin with a tenderness that didn't match the battle still raging in the distance. "You don't understand," he murmured. "If anything happened to you, I'd burn the world until there was nothing left." Before she could respond, he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was rough, desperate, full of the fear and fury he'd been holding back. She tasted blood and rain, felt the heat of him pressed against her, and for the first time since this bond began, she didn't think about whether she wanted it. She just wanted him. When he pulled back, his eyes burned gold. "You're mine," he said, his voice low and absolute. "And I'll kill anyone who thinks otherwise." Scarlett's pulse hammered. But she didn't look away. "Then you'd better be ready, because they're still out there." Alexander's gaze flicked toward the shadows beyond the clearing, his jaw tightening. "Let them come." But in the darkness at the edge of the forest, unseen by either of them, a figure watched with cold, calculating eyes. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. Chapter 14. The clearing looked like a crime scene when the pack finally swept through. Dark soil churned, grass flattened, streaks of blood already turning black in the cold. By then, Alexander had Scarlett wrapped in his jacket and on his feet, refusing to let anyone else carry her. "I'm fine," she muttered for the 3rd time. "You're bleeding," he said without looking down. "You're not fine." "It's a scratch." His jaw ticked. "It's my mate bleeding. That makes it an emergency." She could have argued with his logic, but her ribs hurt every time she breathed, and the world swam if she looked anywhere but straight ahead. She let him win. For once, it felt like survival, not surrender. Elias met them at the edge of the trees, hair damp with sweat, shirt torn. "Border is secure. For now." The rest scattered when the big one dropped. His eyes flicked to Scarlett, taking in the way she pressed a hand to her side. "Healers ready." "Good," Alexander said, already moving. "And Alex?" Elias lowered his voice. "Someone called them in. Rogues don't coordinate like that without a signal." Alexander's eyes flashed molten. "Find it." They didn't speak again until they were inside the infirmary wing of the pack house. Light and cedar oil, replacing the scent of iron. The healer, Matilde, all quick eyes and quicker hands, shooed Alexander to the far wall and peeled the jacket from Scarlett's shoulders like it was a crime to rush. Clean through the dermis. Matilde frowned at the claw rakes along Scarlett's ribs. "No organ involvement, praise the moon. You'll scar if you keep wriggling." "I'm not wriggling," Scarlett said through her teeth. "She is," Alexander answered for her. Matilde never looked up from her work. "She can answer for herself, Your Majesty." Scarlett tried not to smile. Alexander went very still, then took one slow step closer as if proximity alone could become permission. Matilde's hands paused on the salve. "Out." "No," the healer huffed. "I have bandages and very little patience." "I have a mate who smells like blood," he said, voice roughening, "and less than none." Scarlett put her palm lightly on Matilde's wrist. Let him stay. He won't get in the way. He will hover, the healer muttered, but she resumed cleaning the wound. Scarlett hissed when the tincture stung. Alexander's fingers purled against the counter until the wood complained. It shouldn't have been comforting, the way he vibrated with barely contained need to fix what Claws had done. It was, and that terrified her almost as much as the rogues. There, Matilde said at last, laying gauze and wrapping Scarlett's ribs with gentle precision. No running, no shifting, no vigorous activity. Her gaze slid to Alexander with intent. Give the skin 48 hours. He made a sound that was not a laugh and not appropriate for a medical room. Scarlett cleared her throat. Noted. Matilde shot Alexander a look only fearless women gave kings. You can talk to her now. He was at Scarlett's side in a breath, kneeling so they were eye level. His pupils blew wide at the scent of her skin under salve and wolf blood. Possessive, yes, but there was something fragile in it too, as if fear still had its hands around his throat. You scared me, he said quietly. You scare me all the time, she answered, just as soft. He huffed a humorless breath. I'm aware. Silence pressed in. The bond hummed, a low wire, hot and insistent, threading beneath her sternum. In the aftermath of battle, it felt different. Not a tether she resented, but a pulse she couldn't ignore. Her wolf, a shaky golden presence, stretched lazily under her skin and settled right against it, purring like heat on snow. Elias appeared in the doorway, timing as impeccable as ever. Found something. Alexander rose, the king snapping back over the man like armor. Show me. Elias opened his palm. In it lay a small disk of black stone etched with a spiral and 3 lines. It looked like nothing. It smelled like old ash. Witch sigil, Elias said. Buried under the western border cairn. It thrummed right before they crossed. Matilde swore, which Scarlett respected. Alexander's expression went very calm, the kind of calm that meant destruction by morning. Send a runner to the warren. I want the priestesses here by dawn. Elias nodded, then hesitated. And a messenger from the council just arrived. The High Alpha demands compliance with the trial of the hunt at first light. Said your stunt tonight has no bearing on pack law. Scarlett's stomach sank despite the steadying presence of the bond. They still want to hunt me. They want to test me, Alexander corrected without heat. And leash you. He looked back at her. Something lethal and tender wore on the same face. They can have neither. Alex, she began. He shook his head. Eyes going gold for a heartbeat. I told them you would stand under my protection. That makes you my responsibility, not their spectacle. And if they insist, his mouth curved. It wasn't a smile. We'll give them a different show. Matilde groaned. Please warn me before you turn the court into a slaughterhouse. I have inventories. Scarlett found her voice. What does that mean? Different show. Alexander's gaze held. It means the only thing that outranks a council edict is a sovereign claim publicly sealed before the moon. He didn't move, but the room felt smaller. I mark you, Scarlett, tonight. For a wild second, nothing existed but the sound of her own heartbeat. The words were a blade and a balm at once. She could see it as if it were already done. His mouth at the soft place where her neck met her shoulder, heat and teeth and vow. The bond roaring like a storm and then settling. Finally quiet, and yet, choice, she said, her voice thin but steady. You promised me choice. Something in his shoulders eased. I did. I won't be backed into it because they want to hunt me like a fox. I'm not backing you anywhere, he replied, barely above a whisper. I'm drawing a line they can't cross. Elias cleared his throat, almost apologetic for existing. There's also the figure in the trees. Kellen swears he saw red eyes again. Not wolf red. Witch red. Scarlett's skin pebbled. Red like the enemy Alpha. Red like the sigil. And one more thing, Elias added, because crises arrived stacked. The envoy who brought the council summons? Not a council dog. Silver Fang crest on his cloak. Lucien, Alexander said, the name like a taste he didn't bother to mask his disgust for. Of course. Scarlett's wolf bared her teeth on a low growl that didn't bother to pass through her mouth. Alexander's eyes flicked to her. Something hungry and grateful moved through his gaze. Rest, he told her. A command sanded down to a request. Eat. It'll be back in an hour. She arched a brow. She arched a brow. With a crown or a war? Why not both? Elias muttered. Alexander's hand brushed Scarlett's knuckles, a fleeting touch that buzzed straight up her arm. Then he was gone, Elias ghosting after him, leaving the door to hush, shut on air that suddenly felt too thin. Mathilde handed Scarlett a bowl and a glare. Soup. You're pale as death. Scarlett took the spoon, hands steadier than she felt. You're very bossy for someone who just watched a king bristle. He's not my king in here. Mathilde's mouth quirked. And you're not his property out there. Scarlett surprised herself by smiling. It cracked, but it held. She tried to eat. Halfway through, the world tilted. The kind of tilt that meant fatigue and adrenaline were conspiring to knock her flat. She dozed without meaning to, head against the padded chair, breath sinking unconsciously with a heartbeat that wasn't in the room. When she woke, the air was colder and the moon had climbed. The bond thrummed sharp enough to sting. She sat up too fast, winced, pressed a hand to her bandaged side. The door opened on a whisper. Alexander entered alone, hair damp, shirt changed, danger banked embers. He stopped when he saw her awake, and the unguarded relief on his face felt indecent to witness. Don't you own a bed? She asked, because humor was easier than the look in his eyes. He closed the distance, crouched so they were level, and braced his forearms on either side of her thighs. I own a kingdom. None of it matters if you're not in it. She swallowed. That's a lot for a scratch. It's not about the scratch. He swept a strand of hair behind her ear, the back of his knuckles catching at her jaw. It's the image that keeps replaying. You under him, blood in your mouth, my heart stopping. Scarlett's breath stuttered. I got him off me. His mouth twitched. Yes, then I finished it. He studied her face. The curve of her lip, the stubborn line of her chin. I talked to the envoy. And Lucien is sniffing at the edges of law. He'll argue you're a destabilizing factor and insist the trial proceed, for balance. The council will like the theater of it. Wolves love a hunt. His gaze cooled. I told them the hunt would be mine. Meaning at moonrise I declare you under sovereign claim. He didn't blink. I ask you again, with the world listening this time. If you say no, I will burn every inch of this land to keep them from touching you. If you say yes, I will mark you where they can see, and dare them to try. Her heart did that painful, lovely ache thing. You're very dramatic. I'm very in love with winning. It slipped out of her before she could stop it. And with me? His inhale was ragged. He rested his forehead to hers for the barest second, as if anything longer would break something permanent. With you, I am unrecognizable, he admitted, which is the worst thing that's ever happened to my enemies, and the best to me. Something unclenched inside her, not all the way, but far enough that she could breathe without fear sitting on her lungs. Then I'll answer you at moonrise, she said. Not because of the council, because of me. His body eased, a predator uncoiling. I'll take that. He stood, offered his hand, she took it. The contact sang. They made it as far as the threshold before Elias reappeared like bad news personified, cloak wet with mist, eyes sharp. We found the witch, he said without preamble, or what's left of her, throat cut, hands black with sigil ash. And this. He held out a leather roll. Inside lay a knife the color of old bone, its hilt wrapped in silver wire. The air around it felt wrong, like a draft in a sealed room. Mathilde swore again. Severance blade, used at blood moons to cut bonds. Scarlett's mouth went dry. Someone planned to break us? Elias nodded grimly. And not gently. This kind of putt breaks the wolf too. Sometimes kills the bearer. Alexander's hand tightened around Scarlett's. Lucien, he denies it, Elias said. Blames radicals acting without sanction. And the council? Scarlett asked. Officially horrified, Elias said. Unofficially fascinated. And victories. Scarlett's skin prickled. The bond thrummed, bright and urgent now. Not a chain but a drumbeat. Her wolf pressed against her, humming with a fierce, bewildered joy that made her throat tight. Scared? Alexander asked, voice so gentle it almost wasn't his. Yes, she said honestly. Me too. He smiled then, small, not for anyone else. Good. Scared means it matters. Before she could answer, a bell clanged from the north wall, 2 deep peals that sent bodies flooding toward exits and hands toward weapons. Elias sprinted down the hall. Breach. Who? Alexander snapped, already moving. Not who, Elias said, eyes cutting to the terrace doors. Where? They all smelled it at once. Smoke, sharp and acrid, threaded with the same wrong ash scent from the sigil. It seeped under the carved doors like a living thing. Mathilde grabbed Scarlett's arm on instinct. Alexander was there an instant later, shouldering them both behind him as the doors shuttered. Scarlett's heart slammed. The bond surged so hard it stole her breath. Moonrise had come early, and someone else had decided to choose for them. Of Chapter 15. The carved terrace doors buckled inward with a splintering crack, hinges tearing free as smoke rolled in like a living thing. Scarlett's lungs seized on the first breath. Bitter herbs and scorched earth, the exact wrongness shed, smelled the night of the rogue attack. Alexander was already moving, stepping in front of her, claws half-shifted and glinting in the torchlight. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice a low growl. From the haze stepped half-shifted wolves, their bodies wrong, too twisted, too slow for living flesh, but too fast for corpses. Their eyes glowed witch-red, their mouths dripping froth. "Bound rogues," Elias muttered from the doorway, silver blades in both hands. "Someone's controlling them." Alexander didn't even glance at him. "Kill them all." The first rogue lunged. Alexander caught it mid-air, claws raking down its chest before he flung it into the marble pillars. Elias cut the second down clean, silver hissing in the wound. Scarlett knew she shouldn't move. Her ribs still ached from the last battle. But when one broke past the two alphas, she had no choice. Her hand closed on a torch from the wall. She swung with all her strength. The flaming head cracked across the rogue's jaw, fire licking up its shoulder. It shrieked, stumbling straight into Elias' waiting blades. Alexander's head snapped toward her. For one heartbeat, the gold in his eyes wasn't fury but pride. Then the terrace shifted. A tall, hooded figure stepped through the smoke, bone-handled knife in hand. The air around him rippled with dark magic, the severance blade pulsing as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Scarlett's blood went cold. The figure's gaze locked on her. "Lucien sends his regards," he rasped, "and his condolences for what you're about to lose." Alexander lunged, hitting the intruder hard enough to slam him into the railing. The knife clattered across the floor, spinning to stop at Scarlett's feet. Every instinct screamed, "Don't touch it." But if Alexander fell, the blade would be their end. She reached down. The instant her skin met the hilt, pain shot up her arm, icy and sharp, a wolf snarling in protest. But she held on. The intruder caught sight of her with the weapon, his red eyes flaring. He shoved Alexander back and came straight for her. Scarlett didn't think. She drove the blade into his side. The scream was inhuman. Magic burned in the air as he staggered back, dissolving into smoke that the wind carried away. Silence fell over the terrace, broken only by Scarlett's uneven breathing. The knife slipped from her hand, clanging to the stone. Alexander was there instantly, pulling her against him, his heartbeat wild under her cheek. "You could have been killed," he said, voice rough. "You almost were," she shot back. They stared at each other, the smoke curling around them, the bond thrumming hot and urgent. Finally, Alexander's hands slid to the back of her neck, his voice dropping to something dark and certain. "No more almosts, Moonrise. I mark you before the whole world, and no one will ever try this again." Scarlett's pulse pounded. "Then you'd better be ready, because they're not finished." Alexander's gold eye burned. "Neither am I." Chapter 16. Dawn found the palace holding its breath. From her seat by the arched window, Scarlett watched the guards trade places in the courtyard below, armor catching the weak light like fish scales. Every movement was crisp and economical, but strain lived in the edges. The tight jaws, the sideways looks toward the eastern wall where last night's smoke had stained the stone. The ache in her palm pulsed with her heartbeat. She flexed her bandaged hand and felt the ghost of the severance blade bite all over again, cold threading bone. The healers had said the burn would fade in a day, 2 at most. They hadn't felt how the magic had slid its hook under her wolf and tugged. The door opened on quiet hinges. Alexander crossed the chamber without greeting. Damp hair pushed back, shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. He carried the scent of cedar and rain and the metallic whisper of blood that wasn't fresh anymore but hadn't fully left him. Elias stood, already at the map table, sleeves inked from the night's notes, a scar at his temple flushed from lack of sleep. Cassian took up the shadow just inside the door, eyes everywhere, fingers resting near the hilt of his blade as if their conversation might require steel. They knew where to hit, Elias said, fingertip tracing the southern approach. Not the weakest spot, the fastest. Straight line from the tree line to the terrace doors, no hesitation. Guided, Alexander answered, gaze like a blade. Bound rogues don't coordinate. Someone walked them in and cut the leash at the threshold. And knew we'd be there, Scarlett said. Her voice came out less steady than she liked. Too soft in a room that felt sharpened to a point. 3 male gazes lifted, then settled. She didn't flinch. Alexander's attention held on her a heartbeat longer than on anyone else. Something in his eyes softened, not the color, not the shape, but the temperature, before it went hot again. They'll keep probing until moonrise, not to win, to rattle us, to make me strike first. So don't, Elias said, not on their timing. I won't, Alexander replied, which did not mean he couldn't. Cassian's mouth moved like he almost smiled and thought better of it. Scarlett stood, the bandage pulling as she lowered her hand from the windowsill. He sent the blade to frighten me, she said quietly, and to show us he has more than wolves. Witches, Cassian said grim. At least one, maybe a coven broken and sold by the piece. Elias rolled the map's edge. We salted and burned the sigils along the west wall before dawn. Ward smoke in the vents. If a witch steps inside now, she'll choke on her own power. Unless she doesn't need to step inside, Alexander said. Unless she's already here. That sat in the air like a cold stone dropped in deep water. For a moment all Scarlett heard was the clatter of plates in some far kitchen, and the wind's small, insistent fingers in the banners outside. A knock. Cassian opened. A man in black and silver entered with the posture of someone who had never been struck when he deserved it. A messenger by the cut of his coat and by the way he smiled with his eyes closed. He bowed so far his vertebrae protested. From the Silver Fang Alpha, he purred to the floor before straightening. His gaze found Scarlett as if pulled and stuck there. At moonrise, present your attachment, to be judged, or forfeit it. The goddess does not favor bonds forged in poor blood. A bone bite in Scarlett's palm flared. She lifted her chin and did not touch it. Alexander took one step and it felt like the room shrank. Tell Lucien, he said, voice unhurried and very dangerous. That moonrise will be the last time he breathes in my house. The messenger's lashes fluttered as if from a strong wind. I shall deliver your poetry with care. He bowed again and left with his throat intact, which struck Scarlett as a mercy, not a failure. The door closed. Elias whistled low. Bait, he said, as if the word tasted of rust. Alexander did not deny it. He came to Scarlett instead, stopping close enough that his heat pushed back the chill in her hands. He wants me to take you early. Then, he calls it an abduction, the council squeals, and we spend moonrise arguing procedures instead of finishing this. She could feel the bond humming under her skin like a wire that had been plucked. The pull wasn't a rope dragging her. It was a drumbeat rolling up from the ground. Her wolf leaned into it, bright and golden and reckless. And if you wait, she said, he will try to cut me out of you in front of everyone. He brought the knife for spectacle. We bring our own, Alexander said softly. His fingers hovered near her bandaged hand and did not touch. She hated and loved him for that restraint. He turned to the others. We hold, Cassian. Swat the South Patrol to the east, and rotate fresh eyes onto servants and guards. No one breathes in the East Wing without a past and a witness. Elias, call in the priestesses. If there's a whisper of witchcraft near the terrace tonight, I want it drowned. Elias nodded, already moving. Cassian dipped his head and vanished like a door closing. When they were gone, the room felt larger and smaller at once. Alexander stayed where he was, fists opening and closing as if the air resisted him. Scarlett watched tendons rope and release in his forearms, and could not quite stop thinking of his body braced over hers on the terrace last night, smoke in his hair and blood on his mouth. The world narrowed to the shape of his hands on her. Does it hurt now? He asked. The question was too gentle for his voice. He meant her hand. She lifted it. He didn't take it. He waited. She put it in his palm herself and watched his face while he studied the angry red lines that webbed her skin under gauze. His thumb didn't stroke, it hovered. Heat without pressure. Less, she lied. The pain had dulled to something that only spiked when she thought of the knife too clearly, which she would not do. It's not the hand, she admitted after a beat. It's the feeling that I am a hinge he wants to break just to hear the sound. Alexander's mouth went hard. You are not a hinge, you're the door. A rough breath. And I am the house around it. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise, he said, and a map. He set her hand down carefully, then braced his own on either side of the table, bowing his head for one deep breath like a swimmer sighting bottom. When he looked up, the king was back, but not over the man, beside him, somehow. Two faces layered and finally in agreement. Come with me, he said. He didn't take her hand this time. He offered his arm. She slid her fingers into the bend of his elbow and let him lead her into the narrow corridor that ran behind the council chamber, down a stair steep enough to demand attention, and into a room cut from the stone itself. It smelled of oil and leather and old smoke. Racks of weapons lined one wall. On another hung a tapestry so faded it was mostly shadow. In the center stood a round table of black wood ringed with chairs worn smooth by generations of worry. Elias and Cassian were already there, with three others Scarlett didn't know by name, captains by their posture, oaths in their bones. There were tokens laid out on the table. No pretty maps now. Iron nails, a strip of ribbon that had once been white, a shard of black stone etched with the faint spiral, and 3 lines shed seen burned into the soil. Wordwork and counters piled together like a handful of teeth. 2 layers, Elias said, tapping the shard. The spiral draws power. The lines route it. They seeded them in cairns and lintels when we were blind. We broke what we found, salted the rubble, burned it for good measure. But if there's a 3rd layer under the terrace stones, the priestesses will hear it, Alexander cut in. If they don't, we weigh our own noise over it. Chant until the rock remembers whose house it is. Scarlett listened, absorbing more than she understood. It relaxed something tight in her chest to watch them think like this, to see where caution met hunger and did not try to eat it. The bond buzzed warm at the base of her skull. She forced air out of lungs that had forgotten the trick and found her voice. What if he doesn't mean to cut me at all? She asked. What if the knife is only distraction? If what he wants is to make me run so he can argue at dawn that I proved unfit? Alexander looked at her like she had said something had been waiting for her to say. Pride. God help her, it lit her up. Then we write the opposite into the night, he said. You stand. You walk when I walk. You fight if you have to. You do not run except toward me. I won't, she said, and meant it more than anything she'd meant in a long time. Cassian sketched a quick sigil on the table, eyes flicking up. We also plan for the worst. If he slips something past the priestesses, if he throws dust or song that makes the crowd break. I take her out through the north passage while you take his head. That's the old play, Elias said. Hell expect it. Hell have men at the stairs. Then we make a new old play. Alexander's mouth did that not smile again. We put her exactly where he can see her, and surround her with teeth. Scarlett swallowed. That plan's very you. You wanted accuracy, he said. It was not entirely a joke. They talked until the candles burned low and were replaced, until the lists of watchwords and counters filled a page in Elias's quick hand. Once or twice, Alexander's attention snagged on Scarlett as if on a nail. Once or twice, she caught him. Neither of them looked away quickly enough to call it accident. When they broke, it was not because they were finished. It was because time had moved and refused to slow down. Elias went to the walls with the priestesses to walk the stones and listen. Cassian vanished down passageways only he and the mice knew, to check the traps for new teeth. The captains took their men to the east, the west, the kitchens, the rafters. The house that had held its breath slowly learned to breathe in formation. Alexander led her back through the narrow corridor and into a smaller room off the east gallery, a place of dark wood and softer light where the walls held shelves and the shelves held books and boxes in equal numbers. The door closed with a solid click. You should rest, he said. It sounded like he didn't believe it would happen. So should you. I will, after. After what? His eyes found her mouth. After I remember what I'm fighting for. It landed like a touch. She was suddenly too aware of every part of herself he wasn't touching. The skin at the hollow of her throat, where his teeth would rest when he marked her. The slope of her shoulder that had felt his jacket last night. The inside of her wrist, where his pulse would align with hers if he pressed it there. The door seemed too far. A table seemed too near. Her wolf breathed in his scent and went molten, curling around the ache in her palm like a cat around a wound. She stepped closer until the fronts of their bodies took the same air. You already know, she said, because humor was the last rope on a cliff, and she had always preferred ropes to wings. I want to know again, he said. No humor at all. He kissed her like a vow spoken into a cupped hand, contained, deliberate, heat held in the shape of patience. His mouth was worn and sure, and tasted faintly of mint and iron. The bond surged, not a spike but a swell, heat rolling through her, the wolf in her lifting its head and pressing its muzzle into his chest from the inside. Her burned palm flared when she dragged her fingers up his shoulder. He caught her wrist before she hissed, cradled it between their bodies, and kept kissing her until the pain blurred into something else. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers, breath ragged. Mathilde said 48 hours, he said, voice ruined velvet. If I ignore her, she'll put me to sleep with a spoon. She would, Scarlett said, dizzy and fierce. And I'd help. Traitor, pragmatist. He laughed, a raw sound that felt like heat thrown on snow. Then he sobered, thumb sweeping once at the place under her ear. Where the mark would sit, the room hushed around the shape of what he didn't do. Tonight, he said. Tonight, she echoed. The word felt like it had weight and heat and a mouth. A soft knock jarred the wood. Cassian's voice came through, taut but not urgent. Report. Alexander opened the door. Cassian slid in, eyes scanning, assessing, finding them too close and deciding not to see it. 2 of the kitchen boys never checked in for the second shift, he said. We found their aprons stuffed behind the root cellar racks. No blood, no scent beyond cloves and fear. Runners? Elias asked from behind him. Scarlett realized he'd come up the hall and arrived in time for the knock. He stepped into view, brow drawn. Or bait? Bait, Cassian said. They want us chasing alley cats while the house burns. Then we don't. Alexander's hand found Scarlett's again, thumb grazing the bandage, as if anchoring himself more than her. Keep the lines tight. No one moves alone. If someone screams, 3 people answer. Ball starts at sundown, Elias added. Allied alphas and their perfumes will choke the hall. And their eyes will be on us, Alexander said. Good. Let them see. Scarlett thought of the staircase, the swell of music, the heads turning when she descended in a dress chosen to make her look untouchable. She thought of Lucien's red gaze sliding over her like a hand. Her wolf bared its teeth inside her, and the fear that had sat like a coin in her stomach since dawn flipped over and showed a different face. When he asks to dance, she said, voice steady, you'll say no. I'll say no before he breathes, Alexander said. And if he tries to touch me, I'll remove the hand he tried with. Good, she said, because if you're slow, I'll do it first. Cassian's mouth actually twitched then, a flash of teeth that might have been relief, masquerading as humor. I'll keep a bucket for the mess, he said. Elias nodded once, approving something beyond the words. I'll see the priestesses to the terrace and leave 2 at the gallery doors. If a spell so much as coughs, they'll spit in its mouth. They left again, duty dragging them along threads laid years before. Alexander stood still for a rare few seconds more, as if letting the room catch up to his body. Rest, he said again, softer. Eat. Tell Mathilde I begged you. I'll tell her you groveled, she said. Lie if you must. I always do. He kissed her once more. Brief enough to feel like a theft, then was gone, the door shutting on the smell of cedar and the echo of his boots. Scarlett sank into the chair by the window and let her muscles unclench in increments. The courtyard below moved in careful choreography. Ward's smoke curled along the eaves, sharp, herbal, clean. She ate the bread and broth Mathilde shoved into her hands without remembering to ask, and slept for 20 minutes with her head tilted against the cushion and her palm turned up on her thigh like a surrender, she could take back at any time. When she woke, the light had slipped toward late afternoon, gold narrowing to a blade. The house had changed its clothes. Music bled through the floors from the great hall. A violin tuning to some old song that had outlived a dozen dynasties. Servants' footsteps ran soft as mice in the corridor. Somewhere, someone laughed too loudly and then stopped, as if remembering where they were. End. Scarlett stood and held herself still until the ache in her side settled into the edges. She walked to the mirror. The woman who looked back at her wasn't the one who had first stepped through the forest that night and found a man with eyes like a storm waiting. She was taller, somehow, without having grown. There was a line at her mouth that hadn't been there. It made her look older and more certain. She touched the place under her ear and imagined heat and teeth and vows. Her wolf pressed into her palm from the inside like a promise. The sun flattened itself against the horizon. The first bell would ring in minutes. She smoothed her dress when it came and stepped into the corridor as the palace inhaled to become a theater. Far across the grounds, in a camp pitched just beyond the old boundary stones, Lucien stood before a mirror of his own, a shard of polished obsidian rimmed in wire that didn't catch the light so much as drink it. A woman's voice whispered out of it, gravel and silk entwined. "He will hold," she said. "He will not reach for the knife before you." Lucien smiled with only one side of his mouth. His eyes were calm and very red. "He'll reach for something," he said. "He always does when it's close to being taken." "And the girl?" "Shall run," Lucien said, and stroked a finger along the bone-white knife laid out on the table, its twin to the one that had burned Scarlett's hand. "Or shall try not to, which looks the same from far away." He lifted the blade and felt it hum. Somewhere, another blade hummed back, twin notes in a song one of them would stop. "Moonrise," he said. "Let's cut something lovely." Back at the palace, Scarlett took Alexander's arm at the top of the stairs. The music gathered itself to a shake. Every head turned. The bond swelled hot and sure. Not a chain, not a leash, but a line they had chosen to hold. She breathed in once, deep as ocean, and stepped forward into the light. Tonight. ... Chapter 17. The palace did not breathe so much as shimmer. Light pooled under the chandeliers in warm crescents, turning the marble to cream and the gilt to honey. Strings climbed the air, fine-boned and bright, and the murmur of voices lay beneath like a tide. Wolves in silk and velvet moved through the great hall with the kind of grace that came from generations of learning how to be dangerous without ever raising a hand. Scarlett stood with her palm on Alexander's arm at the top of the grand staircase and let herself look. The room was a map of power. Allied alphas posted at the edges like sentries, delegates in jeweled cuffs orbiting influence they wanted to steal. The Night Fang banners thrown high across the beams, moon and wolf in silver thread, lifting and falling in the soft breath of the hall. "Breathe," Alexander murmured without moving his mouth. "You're the first thing they've wanted all night, and they don't even know whether to fear you or worship." "Both has worked so far," she whispered back. He hummed in his chest, an almost laugh that translated as heat under her hand. The bond answered, warm and steady, a line hummed on a single low string. They began their descent, step for step with the music. Heads turned in waves. She could feel it when the first eyes found her, then the next. Then the weight of the room's attention settling. It should have felt like exposure. It felt like a stage. Alexander's arm under her palm was iron wrapped in velvet. Each time her heel found the next stair, he was already there, a half-breath ahead, as if the building itself had agreed to meet her pace so she would not fall. At the base of the stairs, Elias and Cassian waited in the shadow of a pillar. Looking like they had done this each year for a century, and would do it for 100 more if the wolves let them. Elias' eyes flicked over her, cataloging, approving, already moving on. Cassian's mouth didn't move, but his hand settled lightly, briefly, at the small of her back as she stepped off the last stair, as if to say, "The ground is real, proceed." "Ready?" Alexander asked without asking. "For what?" "For all of it," she nodded. They moved into the current. Dignitaries floated toward them, bearing compliments like offerings. The Alpha of the Amber Pines bowed over Scarlett's hand. His mate gave her a glance that was more inventory than greeting. A woman in a gown the color of steel mentioned the weather in a tone that suggested she meant war. Every second line contained a hook. Every third smile had teeth. Alexander took each exchange with the same measured courtesy, hands behind his back when he wanted to look harmless. Hands in motion when he wanted to remind a man about the shape of his throat. When he introduced Scarlett, he did it like he set down a blade and dared anyone to touch the edge. At the far end of the hall, the herald lifted his staff. The metal cap kissed marble with a ring that cut straight through the strings, announcing Lucien of the Silver Fang. Silence rose like mist, cool and damp. A door opened. He came in alone and at ease, bareheaded. His hair like a dark spill caught back at the nape, his coat cut close and trimmed with silver that caught and threw the light. The red in his eyes was not the crude glow Scarlett had seen in bound rogues. It was finer, threaded deep, the way wine stains the inside of a glass. "Smile," Alexander said quietly, and did not. Lucien's gaze swept the room and stuck the way a needle sticks, sharp, precisely where it meant to. He crossed the floor like a man walking his own field. When he reached them, he inclined his head just enough to avoid insult, though to whom he avoided it was a question he let live between them. "Alexander," he said, lazy and warm, "you look well." "Alive," Alexander answered. "It upsets some people." Lucien's smile bent. He turned to Scarlett with a politeness that felt like a hand sliding under a dress uninvited. "And you must be the miracle everyone's arguing about." He let his gaze travel in a slow ribbon from the pearl at her ear to the ring of bandage hidden under the cuff at her wrist. "You wear the room like a crown." Scarlett let him see nothing. "Do all your compliments sound like autopsies, or only the ones meant to charm?" Cassian coughed into his fist and looked away. Elias didn't bother. Lucien laughed, delighted. "She bites. She's not for tasting," Alexander said softly. The words were velvet, the meaning wasn't. "Is that a rule?" Lucien's eyes were red and amused. "Or a fear?" "A fact," Alexander said. "Ah." Lucien tipped his head. "Facts change. Laws endure. Speaking of, moonrise comes, whether we dress for it or not." He smiled at Scarlett so gently the smile itself felt like insult. "Will you dance before the goddess judges you, little wonder?" "No," Alexander said. Scarlett smiled without her teeth. "I don't dance with men who intend to kill me." Lucien's red barely brightened. "Intentions are such mobile things." "And yet you wear yours like cologne," she said. "We all smell it." For the first time, something behind his eyes cooled. He reached as if to touch her hand. Alexander didn't move so much as become larger in a way that made air reconsider where it belonged. Lucien's fingers stopped a palm's width from hers and hovered on nothing. "You'll have to forgive me," he said, lowering his hand with graceful regret. "Old habits. I don't often ask permission." "Learn," Alexander suggested. Lucien inclined his head again, the same almost bow. "Until moonrise," he said, and drifted into the room like smoke through a sieve, seeping into conversations that shifted tone upon contact. Scarlett felt the bond pulse, hot under her breastbone. Alexander's hand found the inside of her elbow and stayed there, unremarkable to anyone not watching for the exact place a king held a woman when he meant never to let her leave. He didn't look at her when he spoke, didn't need to. "Breathe." "I am," she said, and realized she'd been doing it shallowly. He guided her through the next circuit like a general walking a wall. As they went, she watched Lucien work, small words in the right ears. A laugh timed so precisely it broke a trio apart and sent two men to fetch him favors they didn't know they had been asked for. He never raised his voice. He never had to. Wherever he passed, a ripple spread. It snowed like confidence to the unwary and like rot to anyone who had stood too close to a dead thing in summer. Between songs, two women in coral silk paused too near, their voices braided, sweet and sharp. "Oh," said she couldn't even shift. "Human, what did you expect? It's theater." Hell mark her to make a point, and then what? We're ruled by sentiment? "Better than by a council that hasn't smelled a battlefield in 100 years, Cassian muttered under his breath, as he slid a flute of champagne into Scarlett's hand and then relieved her of it in the same motion when he saw her bandage flex. "Water," he said, and swapped glasses with an efficiency that would have impressed a magician. Scarlett caught another thread near a pillar where the light fell thin. A man with a ring of amber at his throat and a woman in shadow gray leaned close, their shoulders almost touching. East stare at the bell. "If he pulls her out, he won't," the woman said. "He's too proud. He'll crown her or choke on it." "Both," the man said, and they parted like actors who had remembered they were supposed to be elsewhere. Scarlett let the room's hum wash over her until the hum sorted itself into notes, and the notes into lines. A pattern emerged. Glances angled toward the terrace doors, servants passing twice where once would do, a courier walking empty-handed and returning with his palm damp regardless. A quartet of Silver Fang men drifted like furniture, never together, always within sight of one another. Lucien did not look at them, which told her more than if he had. "Spies," she said under the cover of the next waltz, and tilted her water glass just so. Elias answered from nowhere, because he had that gift. "Which are the worst kind?" "The ones we don't see," she said. "The ones we forgive," he corrected. "These are only obvious. Useful, though. Obvious things trip quietly when stepped on right." He melted away before her eyes, as if the room had closed over him. Alexander turned them onto the dance floor, because not dancing would have been a message, and every message had a cost. He didn't ask. He simply placed one hand at her waist, took her other in his, and made the world smaller. "Eyes," he murmured, then feet, in that order. She laughed before she could help it. "You're terrible at small talk. I'm exceptional at instruction." "Bossy, you mean?" "Accurate." They moved. He was better than he had the right to be, or perhaps she was easier to carry than he had expected. Either way, the music caught them, and for a handful of measures the room blurred, leaving only the heat of his palm and the clean line of his shoulder under her fingers, and the way his gaze clipped from threat to threat without ever quite deserting her face. "Left," he murmured in time with the kern. "Red silk, hand in her sleeve." "I saw," she said, and then, "White gloves, near the dais. He's counting doors." "Good," he said, and it was not about the guards. On the second circuit, Lucien drifted near again, as if by accident. He did not interrupt. He knew enough ritual to leave the dance to those already inside its spell. Still, Scarlett felt him watching, a cold curiosity that scraped like a coin across stone. "You're very pretty when you lose," she said to Alexander without moving her lips. "I'm prettier when I win." "Vayne. History," he said. The music thinned to a last, long note. Applause rose, glittering and insincere. As it fell away, a herald's bell chimed high and quick, one note only, to mark the hour. Scarlett felt it slide into her bones like a key into a lock. The bond brightened in a way that wasn't light and wasn't music, and yet carried both. The moon out there, finding its height, finding them. "Soon," Alexander said low. "Too soon," she whispered, and wasn't sure whether she meant for fear or for want. They stepped off the floor. A cluster of alphas, allies nominal and conditional, drifted into range like weeds on a current. The alpha of Ashcliff spoke first, his smile polished. "Tradition is tradition," he said lightly, as if he were discussing bread. "One can honor it and still interpret. Tradition that requires spectacle of a woman who just bled for this house," Alexander returned, just as lightly, "is a tradition best watched from far away." A different man, slick as ink, leaned in. "No offense meant, Your Majesty, only, what precedent do we set by rewriting ceremony to suit a king's heart?" Alexander's head turned in that unhurried way that meant he hadn't decided whether to kill a mosquito or let it waste its own time on skin. "The one where the goddess made a bond that outlived your opinion," he said. "That precedent." The man smiled the way a fox smiles at a closed coop. "We will see what the goddess thinks." "We will," Alexander agreed. "Stand close. The view is best in front." They drifted on. Scarlett exhaled, slow and measured. "You do know how to make friends." "I keep trying the other thing," he said. "This works better." He guided her out of the densest knot of bodies and into the thinner air near a row of arched windows where night pressed its forehead to the glass. The gardens beyond lay silver and black, paths shining like scars. Somewhere in that darkness, the terrace stones waited. Somewhere beyond the walls, a campfire snapped in the old boundary field, and Lucien's men laughed like men who believed they would not be dead by morning. "I heard them," Scarlett said. "Near the pillar, east stair, at the bell. If Cassian is right, and they expect the old play, they'll post there." "He's right," Alexander said. "Which is why we'll go through the west door and make them wonder if they misread the map." She lifted her hand. He caught it without looking, as if his body had been built for the gesture, and turned it palm up. His thumb brushed the edge of her bandage. The smallest touch. The world tipped, a tiny, treacherous inclination. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Less. I'll fix it." "You can't fix everything." "I can fix that," he said. And the way he said it made her believe nothing stronger than his mouth and his teeth and his promise would be required. Across the hall, Lucien stopped at the center of a circle that had sprung up around him as circles do around fires. He gestured once with an elegant hand. The listeners laughed, then glanced, 1, 2, 3, toward Scarlett as if called. He didn't look. Power was performative. He understood that better than most. A young server passed too close with a tray of crystal flutes. Scarlett reached without thinking to steady a wobbling stem. The boy flinched, almost dropped the lot, and then caught himself and stammered, "Thanks." His pupils were blown, his breath too quick. When he turned, his color lifted for a second, and she saw ink on the skin at the base of his neck, the faint ghost of a spiral and 3 lines smudged under powder. "Wait," she said, quiet and precise. The boy went statue still. Alexander's head snapped. Cassian materialized from nowhere, palm already closed around the boy's wrist with the exact pressure that implied mercy could be earned and punishment withheld if good at explanations. "What's your name?" Scarlett asked. "Tit Thomas," he said, eyes huge. "Who told you to stand by the east stair at the bell?" His mouth opened, closed. Sweat filmed his upper lip. He darted a glance, reflex, human and damning, toward the door where kitchen servants came in and out. A woman stood there, serene in gray, her hands folded. She did not blink. "Her," Thomas breathed, so quietly only wolves could have heard. He swallowed. "I'm sorry." They said it was just to make sure everyone got a glass. Cassian eased the tray from the boy's hand and passed it to a second server with an expression that said, "Deliver this and do not breathe near it." He looked to Alexander. Alexander looked to Elias. The exchange took the space of a blink. Elias moved, gray-robed woman already retreating, guards already closing. The crowd never noticing because the strings lifted into a song that had always made people turn toward the dais. "Spies," Scarlett said, and felt no particular satisfaction. Just a slotting of pieces. "Useful," Alexander said, and just like that the hall lost one shadow. The first bell for moonrise sounded, clearer now, a note hung like a lantern over the hall. Voices dimmed and reassembled as wedges of procession formed themselves out of practice and scent and hierarchy. The terrace doors stood tall and old at the far end, flanked by torches that waited to be carried. Beyond them, the sky bled blue to indigo. The moon had not yet crested, but its light was in everything, latent and drawing breath. Alexander turned fully to her then, blocking the room with the breadth of his body. His eyes were gold when they landed on her, bright and hot, a metal heated to shaping. "Listen to me," he said, too low for anyone else. "When those doors open, the world will try to become noise. Let it. All you need to hear is my voice. All you need to feel is this." He took her unbandaged hand and laid it flat over his heart. It beat hard and steady under her palm, a drum calling armies. "If anything moves between us, I'll cut it down. If anyone names you anything but mine, I'll take their tongue. If magic breathes on you, I'll make it choke." "Poetry," she said, and her voice wanted to shake but didn't. "You'll spoil me." "I'm already ruined," he said. "I'll take you with me." She swallowed laughter that would have broken into tears if she let it out. "Tonight," she said, "nothing and no one touches you but me," he answered, the vow simple. Arable and perfectly shaped to fit the place in her that had been cold since the first night in the forest. He bent his head and put his mouth to her hair. One single touch, warm as a brand and gentle as a prayer. The bell chimed again. The herald lifted his staff. Torches were taken up. Beyond the doors, night rolled to the lip of the roof and hesitated. Scarlett breathed in, felt the bond surge, and did not think of knives or counsels, or the word human spoken like a flaw. She thought of the place under her ear where his teeth would rest. She thought of the way the rope between them had stopped feeling like a leash, and started feeling like a line thrown from a ship to a drowning girl. "Ready?" he asked. "For all of it," she said. The torches lifted. The terrace doors pulled wide on their old iron. Cold air rushed the hall, tasting of stone and moonlight. The crowd swayed forward, some with hunger, some with hope. Together, step for step, Alexander and Scarlett walked into the night. Chapter 18. Cold rushed the hall when the terrace doors swung wide. Moonlight flooded the stones beyond like silent water, turning every face a paler version of itself. The priestesses were already there, 6 women in gray and white, their hair unbound, their voices a low, braided hum that sounded like smoke would if it could sing. Beyond them, the moonstone circle waited, a ring of old rock polished by vows and storms, etched faintly with runes no hand living remembered writing. The crowd poured after the torches, a river of silk and wolf scent and hungry eyes. Scarlett kept her palm on Alexander's arm and felt the drum of his heart through cloth and bone. The bond thrummed back, a line drawn tight between them and tuned to the same note as the priestess's song. "Eyes on me," he said under his breath. "I am." "Good, stay there." They stepped into the circle and the air changed, thinned, sharpened, like stepping into a bell just before it rings. Elias and Cassian took their places 2 strides behind, weight balanced, gazes cutting the terrace arc for seams and knives. The council arrayed itself like a row of carved saints on the far side, their expressions solemn as empty plates. At the edge of the torchlight, allied alphas formed a ragged crescent, curiosity curdled with bets. Lucien came last. He didn't rush. He never did. He crossed the terrace with his hands behind his back and the easy posture of a man arriving to collect on a debt he'd already written off. 4 men in Silver Fang black fanned to his flanks and melted into the outer ring like shadows. He did not look at them. He did not need to. The high alpha lifted his staff. The metal cap struck stone with a note that hung and fell. "By old law," he intoned, "we gather under the moon's eye, to bind or to break. Contest the word mine and weigh it against the world." A murmur rippled, then died. The priestess's hum rose, smoke to flame. Alexander turned to face Scarlett fully, and the world narrowed to the square foot of stone they shared. His eyes were gold and bright enough to warm. He didn't touch her yet. Consent, even now, especially now. "Scarlett," he said, voice pitched for her and the moon, not the crowd. "I ask you here, not for law, not for spectacle, but because you are the only vow I ever wanted to make. Will you stand with me? Will you be mine?" Her throat tightened, and the part of her that had always flinched at being claimed, like a thing, lifted its head and listened to the way he had said it. "Not own me, stand with me." The bond, that hot, insistent line, softened, no less strong, only less sharp. "I'll be yours," she said, steady, "and you'll be mine." The priestess's song climbed. Alexander lifted his hands to touch her, at last, and the terrace shuddered. It was small at first, a ripple under the stones, like something far below had exhaled. The nearest torches guttered. Ash scent licked the air. Lucien smiled. The priestesses' voices faltered on one note, then broke. Their leader turned, eyes narrowed, and flung a handful of salt silver at the base of the nearest pillar. It hissed, as if something alive had tasted it and recoiled. Wardlines, old and buried. She snapped. 3 spirals, 3 roots, all waking. Elias swore. Cassian was already moving when the far pillar coughed smoke, and a shape peeled out of the stone itself. A man too thin and too fast, eyes burned red from the inside, skin filmed with a sheen that wasn't sweat. He moved like a question mark, crooked and quick, and the bone-white knife in his hand hummed high enough to set Scarlett's teeth on edge. The severance blade. Alexander was between her and the knife before thought. He hit the intruder mid-stride, claws out, momentum cracking stone under them both. The crowd lurched backward as if pulled on a rope. Two more figures slipped from the columns to left and right, witch-bound, each with that same red and the same two-fluid motion. Elias took one, Cassian the other, silver singing, priestesses throwing smoke and song like nets. "Stay with me," Alexander threw over his shoulder, barely breath. "If we separate, he wins." Scarlett's wolf defied the healer's neat warnings and pressed up against her skin, bright and ready. She stepped so her shoulder brushed Alexander's back, touch, anchor, and tracked the arc of the blade through air. The intruder used magic like oil, slicking space so strikes slid. Alexander adjusted in half heartbeats, turning power into angles, trying to force a clean line that the blade couldn't warp. The knife flicked. It scraped the air by Scarlett's face and sang her bones. She ducked, pivoted, grabbed a fallen torch by the iron throat, and shoved the burning head into the intruder's side. Fire bit and the thing wearing skin shrieked, sound tearing at the air like claws. Lucien applauded softly. Charming. Scarlett glanced once, just once, and saw him at the edge of the circle, hands still behind his back, that pleased little boy's smile riding a wolf's mouth. Behind him, his four men shifted their weight in unison. The kind of synchronized accident that only comes from orders. "Now," Lucien said, conversational, and the four moved. They didn't go for Alexander. They went for the priestesses. "Elias," Scarlett cried, and he heard because he always did. He broke his opponent's knee, pivoted, and threw a dagger that took the first Silver Fang man in the throat. Cassian slammed his shoulder into the second, drove him backward into a pillar, and made a mess of his plan. The other two reached the circle's edge and stopped as if they'd hit glass. The priestess at the north point had drawn a line with her heel while no one watched. It glowed now, faint and blue. "Not yours," she said, and her voice was a mountain. Lucien stopped smiling. He moved then, at last, and when he moved, he was beautiful. Clean lines, clever angles, the kind of economy that meant he never had to be stronger than a man like Alexander, so long as he was faster, and hit first. He didn't draw a blade. He reached with empty hands, one for Scarlett, one for the priestess line, and the air around his fingers glimmered as if it had been polished for this moment. Alexander met him. They hit like weather. Scarlett stayed with Alexander's shoulder and the rhythm they'd already found, their bodies turning to place and replace, his claws writing negations into the arc of Lucien's hands. The severance blade carrier slashed in again. Scarlett slipped under with the torch and smashed an embered head into the knife wrist. Bone cracked. Magic stuttered. The knife hit the stone and skittered, spinning, a burning, hateful coin, toward the priestesses. It stopped, not because anyone caught it, because Scarlett's burned hand, bandage and all, was out and the blade hung in the air an inch above her palm, as if something between her skin and it had decided, very suddenly, to disagree. The hum in her bones matched. A knife's note and then detuned it, souring the song. Light, thin, and needle-fine, threaded from her palm to the hilt and back. "Scarlett," Alexander warned, strangled. "I know." Her voice shook and held. "I've got it." The knife quivered like an animal that wanted to run and couldn't. The priestess at the north point whispered a word too soft to catch and blew across her open hand. Ash drifted. The blade's hum sagged. Lucien's head snapped. The first crack in his calm showing at the corner of his mouth. "How? She's not just human," Alexander said, and surged. Lucien met him, red eyes brightening. They traded blows that weren't just claws and fists. They were leverage and history and the fact that one of them had more to lose and knew it. Lucien fought like he had always been the cleverest boy in the room and had never been forced to learn the language of loss. Alexander fought like a house built against winter, broad-shouldered, spare, and hard to set on fire. Two of Lucien's men recovered their nerve and lunged for the knife Scarlett held in the air. Elias was there, no wasted motion, one cut, then another, bodies down. The third, Cassian's, tried to get up. A priestess set her bare foot on his throat and recited a verse that made his eyes roll white. The intruder with the cracked wrist reeled, eyes overbright. He let out a sound like metal bending and flung both hands at the circle. Air warped. The blue priestess line flickered. Scarlett felt it like gravity hiccuping and had one sharp thought. If he breaks the ring, the moon stops listening. "Don't let him cross," she said, and Alexander, without looking, drove Lucien 3 steps back, turning the other man's strength into direction, turned again and put his shoulder into the intruder's chest like a battering ram. Stone cracked. The intruder's head hit it and stuck. Red light guttered. He slid boneless to the ground. Everything narrowed. Lucien's smile came back, smaller and edged. He stepped as if to circle, then cut inside, fast, faster than anything his body should have done. Palm knife flat for Alexander's throat. Alexander turned, took the strike along his jaw instead of his jugular, and his head snapped hard enough to make the world tilt. Blood striped his neck. Scarlett moved without thinking. The bond leaped, heat to white. She dropped the torch, grabbed Lucien's reaching wrist with her ruined hand, and squeezed. The knife sick in the bandage caught the witch sick in his skin and burned them both clean. Lucien hissed, eyes widening for the first time, like he had found a tooth he hadn't planned for in a mouth he thought he knew. "Careful," Scarlett said, breathless. "We bite." Alexander recovered in the space of her heartbeat. He caught Lucien's other arm, twisted, and drove him down to the stone. Lucien tried to flow out of it the way he'd flowed out of every trap for years. Alexander didn't give him room. He set his knee just so, locked the joint, and put his weight on it. Something in Lucien's shoulder made a small, ugly sound. The terrace went quiet except for the priestesses, whose hum had become a full-throated song, old words rising like steam. The High Alpha watched with his face arranged as neutrality, and his fingers white on his staff. The allied Alphas leaned in. The bond in Scarlett's chest beat double time with Alexander's pulse. "Yield," Alexander said, voice gone to gravel. It wasn't a request. It wasn't quite a mercy. Lucien's mouth bled. He smiled through it. "You won't kill me in front of them," he said, and tilted his head toward the council as if they were a god he had invented. Alexander considered that for exactly half a second. "Watch me," he said, and his hand shifted, fingers lengthening to claws, the line of his body leaning towards slaughter. Scarlett put her hand on his shoulder. It was a small touch, barely weight. He was steel under her palm, breath gusting hot. Rage banked to something terrible and pure. He looked up at her, gold bright and wide, and everything, the crowd, the law, the old songs, hung in that look like dust in sun. "Mark me," she said, steady and clear. "Now, then finish it." It was not strategy, it was choice. Something eased in him, the smallest unclenching. He let go of Lucien's wrist without looking at it, rose in one breath, and turned to her. Drawing her in until the noise and the eyes fell away, he slid his hand to the bare place under her ear, thumb along the edge of her jaw. The whole world suddenly a circle the size of his palm. "Scarlett," he said again, not less fierce for being softer. "Last time." She smiled because she could, because the fear in her had flipped too many times tonight to land on anything but joy. "Yes," she said. "Last, first, always." He bent, mouth warm at the place where neck met shoulder, breath a brand and a benediction both. His teeth set, sharp and clean, and the world went white. It wasn't pain, or it was, and she didn't mind. It was heat and relief and a door opening in her chest that she'd been pressing herself against since the forest. The bond roared up like a storm, and then settled like a sea-going glass. Her wolf, hers, rose and stretched and lay down with its muzzle tucked into his ribs. She tasted iron and moonlight and the honey smoke of old vows burning to make room for new ones. When he lifted his head, his mouth was blood, and his eyes were not merely gold, they were the color of noon. He pressed his forehead to hers, one breath shared, then turned back to Lucien with all the gentleness gone. "Now," he said, very polite, "yield." Lucien looked at the mark, looked at the council, looked at the priestesses, whose song had changed key to something that sounded suspiciously like approval. He calculated and could not find a path he liked in the maze left to him. For the first time, his cleverness failed him, because cleverness is poor with absolutes. He laughed once, short and bright. "I yield," he said, and bared his throat. Alexander held him there a heartbeat longer than necessary, enough to say, "I could." Then he let go and stood. Cassian and 2 guards were already there to take Lucien and his men. The priestesses drew their line tight, and the wrongness in the stone pulled back like tide from rock. The High Alpha raised his staff again. He had a speech for this. Scarlett could see it in the set of his shoulders. But the priestess leader spoke first, her voice cutting clean. "Witness," she said, "the moon has chosen. The bond holds." the house stands. It was done, not only by law, but by the older thing that law imitates and seldom equals. The sound that rose then wasn't a cheer. Wolves don't cheer. It was a low, collective exhale, a flock of shoulders dropping an inch, a ripple of approval that moved through the crowd like warmth through cold hands. A few faces stayed cold, men who liked old rules because they had learned to weaponize them, but even they looked away first when Alexander's gaze landed. He turned back to Scarlett. The world had not shrunk, it had right-sized. He reached for her, and she met him halfway, and the kiss they made then had nothing to do with dominance and everything to do with arrival. It tasted of salt and iron and relief, and the faintest sweetness that had lived at the heart of this from the first night and had at last been given permission to bloom. "Mine," he said against her mouth, softer than any time had said it, and for the first time it sounded not like a claim but like a name. "Yours," she answered, smiling into him, "and you, mine." Somewhere behind them, Elias cleared his throat with exaggerated delicacy. "Before you take that entirely literally in front of the clergy," he said mildly, "might I suggest we remove the trash?" "Do," Alexander said without looking away from her. Cassian made a pleased, efficient noise. Boots scraped stone. Cloaks rustled. The priestess's song bled back to hum. The council shuffled papers it had not brought out. Someone sobbed quietly, like a string snapping, and then laughed like it had been a knot coming loose. Alexander lifted Scarlett's bandaged hand and turned it over. The angry red beneath had dulled to pink. The heat had changed from burn to blush. He kissed the heel of her palm, and that small, unnecessary devotion did something worse to her knees than any battle. "Does it still hurt?" he asked. "Less," she said. Then honest, "Not where it did." He grinned, quick and bright and lethal to every argument she had ever made to herself about not loving kings. "Good," he said, and then to the waiting world without raising his voice, "Eat, drink, dance. The house is ours." Later, after the circle cleared and the terrace took back its moonlight, after Elias had finished quietly explaining to a cluster of astonished alphas how ward lines work and don't, after Cassian had personally escorted Lucien past the boundary stones and delivered him into the custody of his own ashamed men, with the kind of courtesy that is worse than insult, after the hall remembered music, the two of them stood for a moment at the edge of it all and watched their people be people. Someone had found laughter. Someone else had found bread. A young Omega sat on the steps with a priestess twice her age, and they passed a cup back and forth like sisters. In a corner near a window, two delegates argued with their hands, and then hugged, shocked by themselves into apology. The world, having almost broken, performed the ordinary miracle of not doing so. Alexander's arm slid around Scarlett's waist. He fit there like a truth. The mark throbbed once, a pleasant ache, then settled, a compass finding north. She leaned into him and felt their bodies decide, together, to believe in rest for a minute. "What now?" she asked, voice low. "Now?" he considered. "I say thank you to the priestesses and give Mathilde my best lies about how fully we honored her no vigorous activity edict. I send bread to the kitchens and wine to the walls. I write a polite note to the council that says in many words what no says in one. I tighten the borders for a season and loosen the collars for a lifetime. And me?" "You," he said, and turned kiss the mark head left, like it was both promise and apology. "Will let me ruin you slowly, until the sun gets jealous." She laughed, half shocked at herself, half drunk on the rightness of being allowed to laugh like that. "Ambitious. I'm very ambitious," he said. "Ask my enemies. I would, but they're busy yielding." He bowed, small and private. "My Luna." She hadn't thought the title would sit on her without itching. It didn't. It felt exactly like her own name sounded when he said it. "Alexander," she said, and the whole strange road unrolled behind the syllables. The forest, and the knife, and the breath she had been holding for weeks. Finally, let go. Home, he swallowed, and it looked like a man relearning how to take a gift. Home, he agreed, then practical again because kings must be. Eat first, then terrorize me in private. Deal. They turned back to the hall. Elias lifted his glass half an inch from across the room, solemn as a toast can be when a man has not slept for 30 hours. Cassian, mid-lecture to 3 wide-eyed guards about the difference between watching and seeing, caught her gaze and nodded once like a bench being offered to tired legs. The night went on, as nights do. The moon rode down its sky, as moons must. There would be other threats, other knives, other men who believed law more lasting than love, and cruelty more efficient than care. But when the last bell rang and the torches guttered to smoke, when the terrace stones cooled and the priestesses braided their hair in the blue before dawn, Scarlett lay with her ear over Alexander's heart and listened to the house breathe. The bond settled inside her not as a chain, not as a test, but as the warm weight of a chosen thing. Outside the window, the first bird dared the morning. Inside, they slept, and the moon kept watch. Epilogue: the forest was different in spring. The snowmelt left the air soft, carrying the scent of pine sap and wildflowers instead of frost and ash. The pack's territory was alive again, wolves running in the meadows, laughter echoing from the training grounds, the sound of hammers from the new watchtower Alexander had ordered built. Scarlett stood at the edge of the terrace, her hands resting lightly over the gentle swell of her stomach. The healer's words still rang in her ears. 3 strong heartbeats. She laughed then, half in disbelief, half in joy, until Alexander had kissed her so fiercely she'd forgotten to breathe. Now, she traced the curve with her palm and felt the faint warmth of the bond there, as if the moon itself had left its blessing. Behind her, heavy, deliberate footsteps drew closer. "You're supposed to be resting," Alexander murmured, wrapping his arms around her from behind. He pressed a kiss to her temple, then to the spot just below her ear, lingering there until she shivered. "I am resting," she said, leaning into him. "Just standing up while I do it." He made a low sound, half amusement, half exasperation. "You're carrying my airs. You think I'm going to let you wander around on your feet all day? My legs still work, Your Highness." "They won't if I carry you everywhere instead," he said, but his hands splayed protectively over hers, his thumbs stroking slow circles against her belly. His tone softened. 3, Scarlett. The moon was generous with us." She tilted her head back to meet his gaze. "Or testing us." A flash of his old wicked grin. "Then let her. I'm not afraid of any challenge that ends with you in my arms." From below, the sounds of the pack drifted up. Elias barking orders at the younger wolves, Cassian laughing loudly at something one of the hunters said. A pair of children shifted into wolf form and tumbled into the grass, yipping at each other until a stern mother called them back. Scarlett watched them with a warmth that wasn't only her own. It was the bond, the sense of home she hadn't known, she'd been starving for until Alexander had given it to her. "You've changed things here," Alexander said quietly, following her gaze. "They laugh more. They come to you without hesitation." "And you?" she asked softly. He pressed his forehead to hers. "I was lost before you. Now I know exactly where I'm meant to be." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind stirred the pines, carrying the faint, haunting hum of the moon priestesses singing far off in their temple. The same melody had been sung the night Alexander marked her. The night Lucien yielded, the night their lives had become one. A commotion rose from the training field. Cheers, shouts, the sound of someone winning a sparring match. Scarlett smiled. "Looks like Elias is putting the young ones through hell again." Alexander's mouth curved. "Good. They'll need to be ready. Aluna's children are always targets." She turned to face him fully, sliding her arms around his neck. "Not if their father has anything to say about it." His gaze burned gold, his hand tracing down her back to rest possessively at her hip. "No one will ever take from me what's mine," he said, the promise low and absolute. "Not you, not them, not ever." She believed him, not because of the steel in his voice, but because of the way he looked at her, like she was the only thing mine. In a world full of kingdoms and wars, that was worth keeping. "Come inside," he murmured. "Before I forget, we're standing where the entire pack can see us." Scarlett laughed and let him lead her back toward their chambers. But before they crossed the threshold, she glanced back at the terrace, at the forest beyond, at the pack running free under the open sky. The moon hung low and full above the trees, silvering every edge. She knew there would be trials ahead, pups to raise, packs to lead, enemies to outwit, but they would face all of it together. Alexander squeezed her hand as if hearing her thoughts. "Home," he said simply. "Home," she echoed, and stepped with him into the warmth of the life they'd built, under the same moon that had brought them together, and would watch over them for the rest of their days. And that's where our journey with Scarlett and Alexander comes to an end, for now. From strangers to soulmates, from threats to triumph, they proved that love, when chosen and fought for, can't be broken by fate or enemies. Thank you for staying with me through every twist, every fight, and every stolen moment between them. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. Now, tell me in the comments, if the moon goddess gave you a mate, would you accept them no matter the danger?